horses, and I mean, he used to go riding, and what he decided to do was he wanted to ride his horse, and his horse's name was Sankofa. And he wanted to ride his horse across America and tell the history of America as it relates to the African experience. And it was just so interesting because he wanted to raise the money to make it happen. And so what he did was he reached out to different people, and he happened to come upon a person that was, he was a sports agent, and the brother had the means to be able to fund this type of activity. And he tapped Dr. Mackey to be the elder historian, the one that would guide the process. And he brought me in as a curriculum writer, because that's my specialty, is to write curriculum. And so, and there were a couple other people in the meeting. And now for those of you who have been in Dr. Mackey's house, you know what I'm about to say. For me, I wasn't surprised because I've been in Dr. Clark's house and I've been to Dr. Ben's house. So you know what it's like to walk into a room where not only are all the shelves filled with books, but the brother had books that were on the ground that went up close to the ceiling, all over the front room, as he was guiding us through where we had to go. We saw these mountains of books that Dr. Mackey had in his house. And the brother who was a sports agent, I guess he had never been exposed to what a house like this looked like. You know, that when you are at a certain level, shelves don't make a difference. You start stacking your books on the floor and they start going up. And I remember, when he saw it, he said to Dr. Mackey, he said, Dr. Mackey, tell me, have you read all these books? Now, those of you who know Dr. Mackey, he had a little sarcasm in him. And he turned around and he looked at the brother, he said, for you to ask me if I read all these books, it's like if I took you down to my wine cellar and you asked me if I drank all this wine. And for the first time, this guy looked at Dr. Mackey and realized he was not dealing with just anybody. Dr. Mackey is an unsung scholar. And it's interesting because I always thought of Dr. Mackey as the same type of person as Dr. William Leo Hansberry, who I wrote my first book about. Because William Leo Hansberry is an unsung person that's behind almost everybody in the work that they're doing. It was I know Dr. Obita Shaka, brilliant brother out of California, said that when he was interviewing Dr. Clark in the late 90s, he asked Dr. Clark who had the most impact on him. Not just as the information, but also just the inspiration that he would give, And, I can't let my brother Dr. Lewis pass by and not say, oh, tell my brother. How's it going, Doctor? How's the family doing, brother? Oh, gotta give the brother a round of applause. So that as we see, and by the way, Dr. Lewis, remember when I brought my daughter to you, okay? She's a mother now, so that's how far back we go. But Dr. Mackey is an unsung hero. He's somebody that has been with us, and I know that he's made an impact on all of us. Even with Dr. Jeffries, I remember hearing Dr. Jeffries talk about Dr. Mackey and the impact that he had on the Black Studies Department at CCNY when he worked there. So it is with pleasure and honor that I will be able to speak at Dr. William Mackey's study group. Because I remember years back when he had it in the basement of his house. And I have a sense of what Dr. Mackey was doing. And he is someone that so many of us, and we rightfully praise the Dr. Clarks, the Dr. Benz, the Dr. Jobs. But there are also many scholars that we have that are just as dynamic that we don't know of. And Dr. Mackey is one of them. Dr. Lewis, you're one of them. The work that you're doing and where you are and what you did for Dr. Ben throughout his life, this is what will come out in time. We have so many folk in our community that are doing such great work, but sometimes the flashlight doesn't always shine on them. But it doesn't mean that they're not doing their work. And it doesn't mean that the people for whom the flashlight is flashing on do not benefit from that individual. Because we've all, I know I personally have been able to benefit from Dr. Mackey and the work that Dr. Mackey was doing. And so it becomes important. I remember, Dr. Lewis, when you came to District 9, and you did that piece on the African presence in Asia. And I believe this was before the book with Dr. Van Sertino. And so when you started showing those slides in South Central Bronx, that was blowing people's minds. They had never, the thought, their neurons had never been connected to think that the original, well, there's two steps. To think that they were African, but then to show them the evidence, to show the pictures that you've taken, Vanuatu, and all the places like that. For our people in South Central Bronx, for some of them that never left the Bronx, they didn't know that this information existed. It changed their entire structure. And I'm talking about the community now, because the programs I had was for the community, for the teachers, but for the community also. And so what my thing has been in working with our children is to study a number of things. And basically what I wanted to share with you was an example of what we're talking about. Because we talk about sharing information with our children, putting it in our schools, and I think that we have to get to a certain point in our understanding of what we're facing. And I'm just going to come from a Kaba thought, from where my mind is right now, how I'm thinking, and what I'm observing. And I'm just going to touch on a few things, as ridiculous as they may be. I think is something that, you know, we should reflect on, at least for the time that we have this. And number one is this issue about the CRT. Okay? Family, that's absolute ignorance. We shouldn't even be spending time discussing this. I'm discussing it so we don't have to discuss it no more. But it's just something we have to talk about. The critical race theory is an advanced law class. Okay, that law students study. It's a course, phenomenal course, brought together by interesting people. But you don't teach that to children. It has nothing to do with the educational instruction, the instructional design of the school day for the children. What they're worried about is someone like me. I'm the one that they're after because I'm the one that goes into schools and I'm the one that talks to teachers and I'm the one that develops curriculum. But what's even most important is exactly what they're telling us. When they say, we don't want you to come into our schools, and everything that they say is only reaffirming what we already know. For instance, we don't want our children to know or feel bad about themselves. Okay, what does that tell me? Okay, that tells me that what I'm about to tell you is going to make you feel bad. Which means that the truth is going to hurt your children. Okay, they say that they don't want information in the school that will make the children think differently. Okay, now that tells me that they want their children to stay as stuck and stupid as they are. And so as they develop that conversation around CRT, they're really telling you something else. It's almost like they are unconsciously repenting for their sins, which I think that they have a mantra. And I'm saying, and I did a presentation where I recommended that they should adapt this as their national anthem. And that's the gospel song, Amazing Grace. How sweet the sound, and tried to change a wretch like that. And so my thing is not to spend time there. My time is to put this out there so that we don't have to deal with this anymore as a conversation. Let me just tell you one other thing. They will never have to worry about me because I don't want to talk to them. I don't want to teach them. I don't want to teach their children. This legacy that we belong to, I am not going to put it in their hands. I'm not going to give them an opportunity to say anything about my life. Who are they to judge my legacy? Our legacy. Who are they to judge it? And so as we move through this process, my bottom line is we have to do this ourselves. That's my bottom line. If we're going to do it, we have to do it ourselves. period. And not look for any help anywhere. Dr. Clark has a piece that says, you ain't got no friends. And if we start from that perspective, then we can manage what has to be done. This can be done. I know others that have done it, and I've done it myself. I know by responses that I get from children that I had as a kindergarten teacher, that I can hear from them now. And they tell me things about, they remember about some of the things that I taught them and told them when they were growing. And some of the things that I told the young people, because my first license in New York is, I can walk around, right? Because I'm used to walking around. I'm moving target, not sitting down. You know, the concept, and the present company excluded, I'm talking about when I've gone to certain places. There are places I've gone where I have to keep my bags in the car in case I can't go back to the hotel. Because truth hurts, particularly when you know that their time is running out. They know their time is running out now. And they know that they have but so much time to be on the planet. There's articles that are written that will tell you that 26 states, and this was in 2019, a woman by the name of Sabrina Tavanisi wrote an article for the New York Times. And it identifies 26 states. You see all this regentrification? These people that are moving into the black neighborhood, these are not the peoples that were always here. These are people from Utah and South Dakota and out west, because 26 states in the United States of America, there are more dying than being born. And this is demography. This is not personal. Maybe a little wishful thinking, but it's not personal. And the reality of it is that the Indo-European ethnic stock, the northern climate, is dying out. And they're dying out for a number of reasons. And it has to do with science, it's not personal. No one would have to raise a weapon against them and they'd still work their way off the planet. When you look at the work of Dr. Cheikh Anta Diop in his magnificent book, Civilizational Barbarism, he outlines 6 human forms. Now, there are many different intermediary steps between these 6 forms. But he has a very neat way of packaging them into 6 specific forms of the human family. He starts with Australopithecus robustus. Then it goes to Australopithecus gracile, or gracile. And then it goes to Homo habilis, to Homo erectus, to Homo sapiens, and then to Homo sapiens sapiens. 6 forms. Now in between you got a whole bunch of people. But here's what science is telling us. Of the Australopithecus robustus, the first real form that's going to come out of the joint family, he is going to, and she is going to live a certain lifestyle. And they're going to grow, and they're going to develop. There are going to be some that are going to be, see, it's not the strongest that survive, and it's not the survival of the fittest. The ones that survive are the ones that can adapt to new ways. That's who survives. It's not the strongest, because sometimes, as you can see, the strongest can die, and even the fittest can die. But the ones are the ones that can find ways to move on, to keep moving on to that next level, whatever it may be. The ones that could continue on, and there were many that could not. In fact, the great majority of robustas did not exist. After a while, they either died out or they fanned out. But then Australopithecus robustus, moving to the next level, became Australopithecus gracile. And they brought the knowledge of robustus with them, but they brought it to the next level. If you can think of music, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. You began with do, you ended with do, but the second do was at a higher octave. And that's like with humanity, there's a higher consciousness in this particular form of human. Australopithecus robustus then grows into Australopithecus gracile. Australopithecus gracile is going to live a lifestyle. It's going to move through a process. They're going to continue. There will be some that do not adapt. Let me stick a pin here for a minute to talk to you about ivy. You know, ivy climbs the wall. That's where you get the ivy leaves, where you get that ivy that climbs the wall of a building, let's say. But the purpose of the ivy is to continue to grow and to continue to rise up on that building, to grow. But there are some ivy that decide that they're going to turn their back on nature. So they turn away from the building. And when they turn away from the building, they fall. And they no longer exist. And that's what's happening here. There are those that are not adapting. So Australopithecus robustus grows into Australopithecus gracile. Australopithecus gracile goes through the same thing. It lives life. We're talking about hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of years. When we start doing this research, we're going to bring these numbers way back. Way back. Australopithecus gracile does the same thing, but something happens in Australopithecus gracile and the way it's being made to live, that it begins to use the environment as its technology. Okay? And by that I mean, you have this form of human. I'm going to choose watermelon because I like watermelons. Okay? Spit a seed. Okay? And what he notices is that the seed falls on the ground. But that where that seed fell, fruit come up. And over time, he starts thinking. I'm not talking about the kind of minds that we have now. I'm talking about those early people, where they're just, nature is dawning on them all of a sudden. They're seeing things for the first time. And he recognizes that, wait a minute, when I spit that watermelon there, other watermelons came up. Pretty soon he said, well, that's a good idea. And then he began to realize, well, when I spit the watermelon seed out, it takes a time for the earth to pull it down and then to allow it to grow. So what this human does is that it begins to take its finger and put a hole in the ground and put the seed there. Because now he's realizing, well, that takes away from a lot of the time that it would take for the earth to take the seed down. I'm going to put it directly in. What I'm talking about is the beginning of agriculture. Okay, but specific agriculture that the human is in charge of and knows and is conscious of what he's doing. He's purposely knowing. It's not like he thinks. He now knows this is science now. He puts a whole, but then after a while, we're talking about a long time, this individual says, but wait a minute, my finger, it hurts my finger, and I gotta bend over. So he thinks about taking a stick, and he jabs the earth. So instead of putting his finger in, he jabs the earth, and he puts the seed in, or she, and then it grows. Now all of a sudden he says, but wait a minute, if I could take 3 sticks and tie them together, I could make 3 holes. Then he says, well, if I were to attach a longer stick to those 3 sticks and do it, it would save my back from having to bend over to do it. So what I'm talking about is the early human in Africa is beginning to developmentally understand agriculture, which is a very important concept. Because I'm going to ask you a question right now about power. And I'm going to say that if all of the restaurants and supermarkets where you buy your food closed, could you eat tonight? And now I knew a sister that worked in the Bronx, in the school where I was, and she and her sister had a little house in the Bronx. They had a backyard. And she knew I liked salad, so she used to bring tomatoes and lettuce, and she would bring it to make salad from her garden. I also had a friend that had a whole bunch of money working on Wall Street. So my question to you is, what I just proposed to you in terms of power, between the sister that worked in the nutritional staff in the school and this other brother that had a whole bunch of money on Wall Street, who had the power? It was the sister. Because when all the stores close, you can have as much money as you want to. But if ain't nothing there for you to buy, you're not going to buy and you're going to be hungry. So that power is the ability to understand agriculture. And that is why most of the technology that came out, the pyramids and the Techanews, and then across the globe, when you look at all of the different, most of them, if not all of them, always were built directly related to the knowledge that the human needed in order to perfect agricultural science. And so what began to happen is that this thought of okay, now I have 3 sticks, and I have a big stick, and I'm jabbing holes. But he said, but suppose I don't jab holes. Suppose I just pull it on the earth and create lines. And then suppose my family come behind and put seeds there. You see what's happening in the human mind. This human is beginning to think now, because now he can do rows going back and forth. His family can come and put the seeds in. And then all of a sudden he says, wait a minute now. That cow out there is not doing nothing. So now if I should take this stick and attach it to the cow or to whatever animal it was, and my family now can start to do what I was doing, and then I can do something else, that is the building of what is going to become Homo habilis. The fundamental, primal concept of Homo habilis, who is the tool maker. He is the one that makes tools. He is the one that no longer is using his body as technology and is learning how to use his environment. Now, go back to the meaning of what it is. Hotep, by the way. Go back to the meaning of economics. Economics does not have anything to do with money. Echo comes from the Greek word oikos, O-I-K-O-S, which means environment or your home. So the basic understanding of ecology is the study of, economics now is the study of your home or in your environment to be able to use it to a point where you can take it to the next level and begin to develop things that you need to develop for your community, because the land is your wealth. This is what Malcolm told us. It goes back to land, but not land ownership, but respect for the land. You don't own it. These folk are going to find that out very soon, if not already. And so Homo habilis now is developing his and her civilization. And what they do is that somewhere along the line, they are still leaning over in terms of their walk. Okay, they're leaning over from their early predecessors that came before them. And then all of a sudden, what they're going to begin to do is that they are going to go from leaning over, because when you're leaning over, you create cataracts or interruptions in your liquid flow. Okay, when you're leaned over, bent over, you have a interruption in your foot, between your foot and where your leg begins. You have an interruption in your knee. You have an interruption in this part of your body, but also you have an interruption up here. And when you have the interruption up here, it causes your head to move back. And what it does is that it stifles the freer flow of cerebrospinal fluid, your blood, and that then goes into your being able to intake oxygen. So what began to happen is that this individual that was stooped over doing this work now stood upright. And that is where Homo habilis now is going to become Homo erectus. And what's going to happen with Homo erectus is that if you think of a water hose and you bend it, there's an interruption in the flow of the water. But if you take that water hose and straighten it out, the flow goes better. So when this human stood up erect, it created a free flow of the liquid systems of the body. There were no interruptions, so to speak, from head top to shoe stop. And when that occurred, that created a number of different things, not only biologically, but also psychologically. Because, if we're concerned about where we're walking, let's say there are holes or whatever, and we're looking down, we're not paying any attention to what's up ahead of us for the most part, because we're too busy looking here. Psychologically, we create a concept of thinking in the present. But when you stand up erect, you now are looking out, and now your perceptions change, the neuronal connections in your brain change, and now you start looking forward, which creates the concepts of future. But not just that, you have a free flow of your liquid systems that's going from your head top, and what's going to happen in the brain here is that it's going to start to protrude out. It's going to start to push out because the early humans had a slanted head. And when that happens, when this forehead starts to come out because of your thinking power, what's going to happen is that you have in your limbic system, which is in the middle part of your brain, you have what's called your ventricular system. And there are 4 ventricles. These are openings, okay? These are like balloons. And in each one of your ventricles, you have the ability to produce cerebrospinal fluid. And that's the free flow that's going to come. Now from Homo erectus is going to come Homo sapiens, thinking human.
Yes, sir.
Okay? And then from Homo sapiens, you're going to get Homo sapiens sapien, who is still a thinker, but they're a creative thinker. And in being a creative thinker, you begin to do things for your society. You start to think in a whole different way of living. Homo sapiens and Homo sapiens sapiens at some point in time coexisted in Europe. That's why you hear people say that Europeans still got Neanderthal. No, but look at how they act. See, that's the evidence. What we're talking about, family, is evidence. We laugh because we know what we see and we know how true it is. Look at them. Look at how they act. They call us monkeys, but on January 6th, I saw some folk climbing up a wall. That was the closest to the Bronx Zoo I've seen in a long time. They do revert back to their natural reptilian brain. In fact, they probably live in a reptilian brain, which is the first brain, and which all living things have, particularly animals. And then out of the reptilian brain, the R complex, comes the limbic system, which is what we're talking about, the ventricular system. And what's going to happen is that you have an opening right here in the base of your head, going inside. It's called the foramen magnum. Now, family, I'm telling you these things only to show you what I believe to be the evidence of what we're talking about. This is not emotion. This is science. And that's why a lot of them being those who wish to oppress us, don't invite me places. Because I don't get emotional with them. I wait for the children to simmer down, and when you're ready to talk on a level of an adult, then we can keep talking. But these individuals are in very serious trouble right now because the foramen magnum, when we stood up, that foramen magnum was squeezed. It squeezed your spinal cord because you had to look up, okay? But when we stood up straight and our brain, it opened up the foramen magnum to allow the spinal cord to be able to move what I call sacred waters of life through our bodies. It also activated the ventricular system. It opened them up because at that time they were squashed in the brain because of the forehead being slanted. When the forehead came forward, it opened up the front of the head. It allowed the limbic system to rise, the cerebral cortex to open up, and then the pineal gland began to really function as it relates to releasing the necessary melatonin and serotonin that the human body needed, that brought a spiritual aspect to this life. And in the book Spirituality Before Religions, I look at the work of Dr. Edward Bruce Bynum. And Dr. Edward Bruce Bynum, in his book Dark Light, he talks about the original human being who lived by the laws of Ma'at, truth, justice, harmony, order, arrangement, reciprocity. In living that life, they also created a thought process that allowed them to be able to flourish, their civilizations to flourish, and that they could live in peace. It is possible to live in peace. I know it's hard after these past 400 years to imagine what it is like that you never ever have to worry about eating. Imagine living in a place you don't worry about rent, You don't worry about eating. You don't worry about clothing. You don't worry about the safety of yourself, your children, grandma, grandpa. Imagine living in a society like that. African people, for many, many hundreds of thousands of years, live like that. I know it's hard. Because of what we've lived, and normally when we're born into something, we think that's the only thing that has ever existed. Particularly when they tell you who you are. And they don't even know who they are, so how are they going to tell you who you are? And so, this concept of thinking and developing now, the reason why I say they don't have long to go is because the first thing that every Indo-European should have done when they came out of the ice mountains, they should have found the biggest, blackest person that they could mate with. Because I always tell the story about Snowflake. You know, Snowflake is that gorilla lived in Spain. He was an albino gorilla. And he would not mate with any albino female gorillas. He would only mate with the black gorilla. Peacocks that are albino. For everything that exists, there's an albino of it, which means that you have lost the protein of your body. And those things that nourish your body. And so when you're looking at this individual, the first thing they should have done by nature, not personal. You see, now when I present to black folk and I speak like this, they ain't having it. But that's a social thing. Because of how they've acted all these years, we don't want no part of them. But in nature, the only way they could survive, Snowflake had multiple children, multiple grandchildren, and he died of skin cancer. There are albino peacocks. They will not mate with another albino peacock. Nature demands, look, you're going to work your way out of extinction. You cannot mate with you. You're a mistake. And the only way you're going to be able to get back onto the line of existence is for you to mate with the original person or entity that I brought you into the world for. Even albino cockroaches. You ever saw an albino cockroach? Yeah, I've seen albino cockroach.
You must have a lot of roaches.
Oh, I've seen a lot of roaches. I've lived around a lot of roaches. In fact, we're living around a whole bunch right now.
That's right. That's right. Tons of roaches.
You know, I didn't think that was funny when I said it. Listen, family. The story that I told you, the first thing that peoples of European descent should have done was to find the original archetype, which was an African. But in their mental disorder, they only mated with themselves. They would only mate with themselves. They were afraid. They were xenophobic, fear of the foreign. So they did not mate with that. They attempted to destroy them and to hurt them, and they created the world that we're living in today, with the melanated and the non-melanated world. But if they had acted naturally, they would have blended immediately in with the archetype when they returned out of the ice mountains. And they would have begun a life of returning back to where they should have been before they decided, as the prodigal son, was to leave home and go up north. Because that's where the story of the prodigal son comes from. They should never have left. So, they're dying out. Just like Australopithecus robustus became Australopithecus gracile, and the ones that could survive became Homo habilis, and the ones that were able to survive became Erectus, and then Sapiens, and Sapiens sapiens. Just like the ivy that climbs up the wall of a building. The ones that connect itself, the ones that act natural, they're meant to attach themselves, that's their purpose. The ones that do that and follow nature live. The ones that turned away and fall down, they die. And that is what the Indo-European has done. And when I say Indo-European, I'm talking about what could be called the European and part of the Asian community. And so they're dying out. And they're dying for a number of reasons. For one thing, they're dying of melanoma. There is a book. Now, I'm going to give you my website for those that don't have it, and I encourage you to go there because I have a free e-course and study guide. And it's in the study guide that I have an entire list of books on melanin from the scholars that I think that we should be studying. And believe me, they're studying melanin. You know, Dr. Jewel Pookrum tells me about a conference that they have in Europe and other parts of the world just looking at melanin. They're having conferences all the time. And a lot of what they found out through us. I just did a webinar, because I do a webinar at the first Sunday of every month. I'll talk to you about what we're going to do this Sunday. But the last one that I did for the month of December was on Henrietta Lacks. Now, Henrietta Lacks is someone that we should understand.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, we should understand who Henrietta Lacks is for the nature of what she represents to us. But sisters should have a picture of her up on your wall for what she says about the feminine energy and the role that melanin plays in your cells. But this sister has shown us things about who we are as a people. She is in all of us. Henrietta Lacks, if you had the polio vaccine, she in you. If you had COVID, they used her cells for COVID. They used her cells for HIV and for Ebola and for the Zika. They used her cells. In fact, Sister Mae Jameson took her cells up into space. Listen, Henrietta Lacks' cell is an example of the greatness of African people, period. Henrietta Lacks, her cells now she died in 1951 at the age of 31.
Right.
70 years ago.
Right.
Her cells are still multiplying. That's why I call her the immortal empress, because she's still alive. But so are all your ancestors. And they're in you. But because we shut down, because of what society tells us, we don't really recognize how great we are and why they treat us this way. And if I thought, because my mama used to always say, you know, Skip, you got a big mouth. You have a lot to say. But in order for you to be able to defeat your enemy, you must think like your enemy. Because if you try to solve your problems with your enemy with the way in which you think, you'll never be able to win. Because you're thinking like you. You have to understand them, and in understanding them, you then can deal and create a plan that's going to stop them. And family, I want to say this carefully, but if I were them, I would do the same thing.
Yes, sir. That's right.
And if you can think from that perspective, then you know how to deal with what you're dealing with. I'm not surprised at them, I'm surprised at us. They're doing, you know, Shashi McIntyre, another great scholar.
Yes, that's right.
Dr. Shashi Charlotte McIntyre. What a sister. And what she taught us. I remember her saying that white folk act the way white folk act because white folk act the way white folk act. And even though that's simple, that makes a lot of sense to me. Because we're tripping trying to figure them out. Don't try to figure them out. They're showing you who they are. They lie, they steal, they cheat, and they tolerate those that do. So under those conditions, what is the negotiation? Ain't no negotiation. Because right now they see their time is up. They know, as I said, research will tell you there are books that you can read. There is a book called The Birth Dearth, D-E-A-R-T-H by Ben J. Wattenberg. Say again, my sister?
That book is very expensive. I tried to research looking for it.
Oh, well, for those of us in First World Alliance, remember Reggie and Lottie and Tuckarama books? I got my first books on Albert Church Ward and Gerald Massey in Xerox copy. In fact, my first book on Stolen Legacy was Xerox copy.
Strange Death of Europe.
Say again, brother?
Strange Death of Europe.
The Strange Death of Europe by Douglas Murray. Because it's not just happening here. It's happening all over. And this immigration thing that everybody's talking about, okay? And they're bringing in immigrants into Europe, immigrants into America. They're not doing it because they want to. They're doing it because they need a tax base. Because their people are dying out. And for whatever this is that's been on this world for the past 2 years, it cut their population. And don't be surprised. Just go back to the 1300s and look at what happened with the bubonic plague.
That's right.
This ain't the first time this happened amongst them. In fact, they brought it amongst us. But they're dying out, family. So my point is, what are we going to do? Not what are they going to do? Even if we never rose a weapon against them, they are naturally dying out, just like the Australopithecus robustus and Racile and Habilis and Erectus and Sapiens and Sapiens sapiens. They are now at the end. We are all now at the end, but let me drop this on you. African American people and African people perceived to be African American people here in the United States are superior. Not because we're African. Because I do believe Dr. King was right, it's the content of your character. We are superior because with everything they've done to us, still we rise. Still we have Dr. Lewis, we have Dr. Mackey, Dr. Clark, Dr. John Henry Clark, Dr. Ben. We still have them with everything that they did. Still we rise. With everything, still you're here. You know you're a miracle. You may not realize it. And you're a miracle because of our ancestors. Because they never gave up. And they knew how to deal with situations to be able to get to the next level. Douglas Murray's book, The Strange Death of Europe. That's them talking to each other. Now you can get a book by Pat Buchanan. Minister Louis Farrakhan was the one that recommended one Savior's Day a couple of years back. He recommended that we read a book by Patrick Buchanan, the Republican that ran for president and all the rest of it. Okay. He wrote a book called Death of the West.
That's right. It was clarion call.
That's what it was. He was telling them. And everybody's looking at what's happening now on January 6th, but this was being plotted back then. Because they saw their time was up, their numbers were dwindling. And the only way that they can win now, and this is what the last election did, no matter how we look at it politically, the one thing that this last election proved was their numbers are down. And they're out. And the only way that they can win now is to cheat. You know Richard Spencer?
Yes.
I was in a documentary with him. And at the end of the documentary, when it premiered on 23rd Street, I had a chance to talk to the granddaddy of them all, who is Richard Spencer's father. Well, not father, but father intellectually of what he believes in, Jared Taylor. And when I opened my remarks, after the movie was done, I said I would have liked to, on a personal egotistical level, I would have liked to have thought that what I said was important. And I said, even if it wasn't going to be me, I would wish that another African that was in the movie, what they said was important. But the most important thing that was said in that movie was said by Richard Spencer. You know the one that they punched in the face? You know the one now that they supposedly took all his money from? He was crying up on TV. He's in big trouble. Richard Spencer said the most important thing that I think we all need to understand when we're dealing with these individuals. And that is, it's not about morality. He said it's about winning. He said we see morality as weakness.
Right.
That's what he said, just right on the screen. It's called Race War. It's a documentary, Race War. He said it. It's not about morality. I'll come in on your house when you're asleep at night. I will divert your attention and cold cop you without you even knowing it. I will go after your children. I will go after your mother. I will give up my mother if it means I'll win. And here we are looking for a fair fight. Ain't no fair fight. It has never been a fair fight. They don't know how to fight fair. And so as we look at this, also think in their desperation of what they're actually experiencing now. There's a book that you can read. It's called Saving Your Skin by Barney Kennett, K-E-N-E-T, and Patricia Lawler, L-A-W-L-O-R, because this is science. And again, they didn't write this book for us. They wrote this book for them. In June of 1994, the United African Movement, with the guidance of Sister Leola and Attorney Alton Matthews, were going to create what was called the Freedom Retreat.
Right.
The summer of '94, where for 2 weeks brothers would go up, and for 2 weeks sisters would go up in the month of July.
Right.
When this was in June, I passed Barnes & Noble on 84th Street, Manhattan, and I saw this big display. It said, Saving Your Skin, had all these books in there. And I said, I need to go get that book. That book, although many of our writers, like Dr. Richard King and Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, and all of our great scholars that have done this work, their books talk about what happens when you have melanin. It talks about the power. But this book, Saving Your Skin, talks about what happens when you don't have it. For so many of us, when we go to the doctor, they don't treat us the way they treat people who are non-melanated. If you're non-melanated and you go to a doctor, they'll ask you to strip, head top to shoe stop, and they will examine your body, sometimes with a magnifying glass, to look for melanomas, which are cancer, which is skin cancer. And they can identify what they call the ABCD. The mole or the bump is asymmetric. It has borders. It has varying colors and the diameter. That's how they judge so-called melanoma. And in this book, by the end of the book, you come to realize that they are on a very, it's more intense now. But science now is saying that a child in the womb can get the aspects of skin cancer inside their mother's womb now. Before you would think, oh, I just got to be in the sun, too much sun is going to give me melanoma. Now they're finding that it is so pervasive amongst them that they can literally pass it into their child, the weakness into their child. So they're dying in large numbers of melanomas. Wishful thinking, but
counts too.
Soon, you know. But you know, even if that were to happen, family, I'm scared. Because even if that were to happen, what are we going to do?
Sure. Right.
You know, the one thing about Saddam Hussein, as wild as he may have been, he kept everybody in check. Everybody was under heavy manners when they were when he was in charge. But once they killed him, everybody went buck wild. And so there was an order and arrangement in his insanity, but there was order and arrangement. And so my thing is, my message to us this evening is that there's going to come a time, and it's happening quicker than I thought, because I never thought I would live to see what I'm experiencing. I thought that would happen much more in the future. I never thought. I knew it would happen. I could just see through history, because, you know, prophets are not psychics. Prophets are just good historians. Because when you know what happened in the past, you can interpret what's happening in the present, and you can predict the future by what you know about the past. And so when it happens, everybody says, wow, how did you know that? You psychic. No, I'm not psychic. I just know history. And I know that history does not repeat itself, but it does rhyme. And what we're experiencing right now is 1865. Because what we're experiencing now, we're experiencing because people of European descent did not do to their brothers and sisters back in 1865 what they should have done. So they let them play games, and now here we are, here's the second time. See, because this is not our problem, by the way. We're in the middle of it because black folk are in the middle of everything. But this ain't our problem. This is their problem. This is the Hatfields and McCoys going on here. They was doing this up in the ice thousands of years ago. They've been fighting amongst themselves. That's all they know. Look at, before they even got into Africa, look, they was fighting amongst themselves. Look at, you know, when you look at Kemetic history, you look at dynasties of greatness, of inventions, of things that were done. And when you look at European history, I know I taught it. Their timeline is war.
Yeah.
Every one of their timelines that they put a date on reflects a war. And that's all they know. Because when you up in the ice, that's what nature's doing to you. Think about your environment. And think about the fact that your environment creates your own thoughts of your creator. And think of being in a climate where you have mangoes and peanuts and, oh my goodness, and you know that somebody comes by, I'm a traveler, I'm a little hungry, do you mind if I partake of your mango tree? You say, sure. Because the mentality under those conditions creates, now I'm not saying that this is absolute, we always have it,
Right,
you know,
right,
there are exceptions to all rules, man.
Right.
But what I'm saying is that the overall society as it is run, you say sure. And the person that's going to take the mango ain't going to stuff their pockets with 20 mangoes. They're going to take what they need because down the road they know they're going to come upon someone else with another type of, and that they'll be able to partake. This was a courtesy that they gave. Let me give you an example. We had a car from 1984 to 1987. And it was a courtesy on the road that I know of, that if somebody came to you and asked you, you know, can you give me a, you know, can you jolt my battery? You know, can you give me a boost?
Right.
You say, you know, if you could, you say, sure. You give them a boost. Now they want $10. Now they want to get paid. And the first time that happened with me, I said, $10? $10 for what? Because the last time I was doing this, it was for free. Okay? Times changed. It changed absolutely as to where we are and what it is that we're doing. And what we have to do is go back into our understanding of who we are as a people. Their time is coming to an end, but if we don't get ourselves together, it don't make a difference what they have. We have to get ourselves together. And when I think of the different areas, I think of our brother, Doctor, I call him Dr. Neely Fuller,
Yes.
who outlines 9 areas. I asked permission to add a 10th. And I have the acronym REL, SEL, WEP. REL, SEL, WEP. The first R stands for religion. We need to get all our spiritual leaders together. I don't care if you're Christian, Muslim, Hebrew, Israelite, Moor, I don't care. We have got to come together spiritually and think in terms of what is best for our people and not proselytizing our own religion. We ain't trying to pull nobody into our religion. What we're trying to do is find out how can I, as a pastor in a church, support what it is our people need. How can I, as a Muslim member, how can I support the community? As a Hebrew Israelite, whatever it is, religion is going to be that key. The first E is economics.
Right.
Okay? See, fam, we know what to do. Claude Anderson, George Frazier, all of our sisters, Karen Hunter, all others that are doing this economic work, we know what we have to do. What's stopping us? It has to be the neurons in our brain. You know, in the movie Django, there's a scene where I think it's Leonardo DiCaprio plays the part where he's talking about that part of the brain that is the slave brain.
Yes.
Okay? Well, that part of the brain is called the amygdala. That actually exists.
Amygdala.
The amygdala. A-M-Y-G-D-A-L-A. The amygdala. I'm going to show you what it looks like once I get this going. We're going to work out a way to do this, where we'll be able to do this. The amygdala in education in particular is your house of fear and emotions.
That's right.
Okay? And for every facial expression you have, that facial expression emanates out of the reaction of the amygdala to what you're experiencing. So you have happy, sad, angry, mad, perplexed, shocked. You have a look on your face that people know, oh, he's happy, oh, shocked. She's sad. Okay? And in that amygdala is what we do with our children. Even those of us who love them dearly, who are trying to do something for them, even we keep them in the amygdala when we tell them you have to pass this test. That's teaching to the house of fear. Have you ever taken a test? And I'm talking about us as adults. You take a test, you start to get queasy in the stomach, you start to sweat, you start to get frustrated. Well, all of that is coming from the amygdala. And guess what? Whoever taught you what you needed to learn failed you. Because they didn't teach to your hippocampus. They taught to your amygdala. And what's making you nervous is the fact that they taught you wrong. And they made you afraid. You have to pass this license like a nursing license or the law exam, Because if they taught to your hippocampus, and both of these areas, by the way, are in your limbic system, the middle part of your brain. And the idea is that the hippocampus, let me ask you, do you remember a teacher that really made an impact on your life? Just any, I hope you had one, please. Okay? There's a reason why you remember that person. And that's because in their presence, they made you feel safe.
It was supportive.
Supported. You believed that you could be you in their presence at all costs. You didn't have to hide nothing. You didn't have to do anything separate. That's because that person taught you hippocampus. I often said that if Dr. Clark had been a basket weaver, I would have been doing this presentation on how to weave baskets. Because I'm glad he did history. But my respect and honor of him was not just what he taught.
Okay.
It was the relationship that he created with us
Finish picking out like our clothes and stuff like that.
as his students.
To bring back to the funeral home.
And that is what I tried to bring to my
I don't know,
classrooms,
maybe I'll go to work Friday.
was that safe haven.
Trying to get my
To understand that you have the ability
I'll
to
call you.
date whomever you want.
Definitely.
And it has to be done from a scientific perspective
Okay.
because what we
Thanks,
say to
I
our
appreciate it,
children
man.
really does matter. And so when you go from economics, rel, sel, web, R is religion, E is economics, the first L is labor. Dr. Amos Wilson, our brother, once told us that a good organization solves its people's problems and meets its people's needs.
That's right.
And when it comes to our children, on what basis should they respect us? If with things that they need the most, they don't have to come to us for. They can't come to us because we can't provide that for them. The two most, I'm going to use this word carefully, successful and important organizations in our community is the church
Absolutely.
and the gangs.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because they solve their people's problems and they meet their people's needs. I watched where gangs are formed in the hallways of middle schools. That's where they're formed, when they're kicked out of class. And so they're kicked out of 401, and the others kicked out of 403, and they're all in the hallway hanging out. And when they get into high school, chances are they'll go to their zoned high school. They're friends already, so they begin to develop that relationship. Well, street organizations is what I call them. Brother from the street organization in charge, he said, "You hungry?" He said, "Yeah, I'm hungry." He said, "Well, come on, let's go. What do you want?" "Oh, I think I'd like a 3-piece with French fries." He said, "Okay, give the brother a 20-piece. Big Mac, Give him a drink. You like those sneakers? Come on, man. Everything that street organization leader is doing is what the father should be doing. Or the mother should be doing. The reason why street organizations exist on the level is because the family unit has been disconnected. And if our children come to us for what they need, they have no need to want to go to somebody else. I've watched gangs grow in South Central Bronx. And that's exactly how many of them grow, in the middle school hallways. Because in elementary school, teachers can't send the children to the hallway. Middle school, they can. But in elementary, something happened in that hallway, you are in trouble if that's in the if that child's in the first grade. And so labor becomes important. Now look at SEL, S-E-L, okay. Dr. Fuller uses the term sex. I tend to stay away from that because of the way in which the word is used in our culture now. I call it gender issues. Family, we got to get our gender issues in place. We have to have those hurtful conversations with each other, because if it don't hurt, then you ain't solving the situation. Because if it don't hurt, it wouldn't have been a problem. You have to have those conversations openly and respectfully in our community on whatever level human relations are dealing with. The second E is my lane. Education. This is where I believe my greatest contribution comes. And I don't cross lanes, family. I don't cross lanes. And I just need to thank my brother, taught me a great lesson. Man, I used this brother's book in language arts. When I taught 8th grade language arts, I used his book as reading material. I remember seeing this brother on Like It Is with our brother, Gil Noble. Oh man, I used to use his book and I used to talk about him, and the brother used to play Beethoven when he was doing operations. I'm talking about our brother, Dr. Ben Carson. Wow, what a source of pride he was then. But he taught me a very important lesson, and that is stay in your lane. Because an absolute genius in one lane can become an absolute fool in another.
Yes, sir.
I learned that.
That's right. Absolutely.
That was a hard lesson to learn, but that was a worthwhile lesson to learn. I have an idea about politics, but I ain't learned for nothing. I have a good idea about economics, but there are so many that have done such a better job before me, I'm not even going to try to get into that line. I'll speak about it as we do now, but I'm not an expert in that area, so to speak, not the way I am in education. As it relates to labor, I have an understanding about how to hire our own people, how to spend money with our own people. I have an idea, but I'm not an expert on that. There are a lot of people doing a much better job than I. As it relates to gender issues, we have phenomenal psychiatrists and psychologists and social workers that can begin to develop programs. I don't need to get into that. Education is my lane, and I stay in my lane. And then you get to the second L, our brother, attorney Alton Maddox. The warrior in law and the lawyer in war. We have so many other brothers and sisters in law. We need to connect and make sure that our children who are going to law school are exposed to Moorish law. Moorish law is valuable. I recommend you go out and get Black's Dictionary. Black's Law Dictionary. Have it in your library just to get a sense of what this is talking about. But what we need to do is have our lawyers bring us into court. Don't try to go in there on your own. Because the moment the judge says to you, do you know why you're here? You're already guilty. Once he asks that question, do you know why you're in my court? No, I have no idea. Why? I don't even know how I got here. Uber? No, I don't know. At that point, there are things that they have to do. There are people that know how to use the law. We don't know it like that as individuals. But if we get people with licenses that have studied the law of this land and also understand Moorish law and bring both together in Ma'atian balance to defend us, then you got a whole nother thing. So that's rel, cell, weapon, war, or security. You can be the richest person in the world, but if you can't protect it, you don't own it. You're only holding it until someone who can take it from you. You ain't got nothing if you can't defend it. And there are people that will take it from you. And then claim it's theirs. Ain't that something? Entertainment is the next E. Entertainment. What is African entertainment? What is our entertainment? I know hip-hop in 65. I know what it was in 65. I know what was going on in the streets in 65. I was in the Bronx. I watched what was happening in the Bronx in 1965, 67. I started teaching in 1979. The big song that was on the radio was Rapper's Delight.
That's right.
Okay? I remember the brothers used to bring out boxes and... But the real point that I'm trying to get at more than anything else is it has to be for us. It has to be governance for us. Looking out for us. And if I may add the 10th, with much respect to my brother, but this 10th one, if this one's no good, the other 9 don't mean anything. And the 10th place where we have to get ourselves together, health and nutrition. Because you could have the most wonderful 9, you could have the most wonderful religion, the most wonderful economics, labor, gender issue, education, law, security, entertainment, and politics. None of that mean a thing if you're sick. None of it means anything. So I asked permission from my brother Dr. Fuller if I could just mention this 10th area that I think we need to focus on as a people and begin to develop a pattern where we can start doing this. And where to begin? Begin in the Mackey study group. You know, Reverend Adam Clayton Powell used to say, you know, what do you have in your hand?
That's right.
You know, start with that. And then lead by example. Because so many times we tell our people, particularly our children, about how great it is to be African, but we always complain. We have problems laughing and enjoying life. And our children are saying, well, I mean, if we can't enjoy life, why would I want to go do that? Okay, there's room to laugh. Our ancestors found room to laugh. Despite everything that they went through, they found room to laugh. They found a way to laugh. And what I'd like to do, because my brother had said that he wanted to do something around 10 minutes to 9. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to talk to you about educating our children. The hookup between the projector and my computer's not working, so I'm going to do the best I can. Because it's not going to work that way. But what I'd like to do is, looking at those 10 areas, for the past couple of years I've been working with groups that have farms. And they have wanted to teach culture. It's right outside of Atlanta, Georgia. There's a farm run by young brothers and sisters that teach children 5 and up. It's called Kinder Gardens. You know, play on the word kindergarten. Kinder Gardens. And they asked me if I would develop some form of a presentation that could show how they could teach culture and at the same time apply it to the science of a farm, agriculture. And so I developed a concept that I call the Children of George Washington Kaba. You know, he was the hero of World War II, right? You know, you'll know that this brother was given a grant by Ford because during World War II, the Axis powers, Germany, Italy, and Japan, and their supporters had a large control over the rubber plantations. And the Allies, Europe, United States, and others, needed to get rubber for the incoming concept of airplanes and trucks and jeeps and things like that. And so they gave George Washington Carver money, and he developed artificial cement and rubber, which went on to the jeeps, and to the cars, and to the airplanes. That allowed the Allies to win World War II.
He developed artificial rubber.
And cement.
I get the cement, the rubber.
Yes. Yeah, Peanut can do a lot, you know. I don't want to go Sabi on you, but he'll tell you what peanuts will do to your stomach. I love them, but it's just one of those things. But yeah. And not only that, Crayola crayon in every color that we have, we need to thank George Washington Carver for being able to find all the different colors and dyes. George Washington Carver brought back lapis lazuli for the first time since ancient Egypt. The perfect blend of lapis lazuli, that blue-green kind of color. George Washington Carver. That short-statured man with the carnation in his jacket used to live on the second floor in Tuskegee Institute and refused to take money, big money, because he wanted to stay with his people. That was a powerful guy. And those that have studied with him know that. The stories my father tells me, when he was in Tuskegee, if you had like if you were running sports or running track, or you were in sports and you sort of kind of had an ache here, he had a salve, just like Dr. Sabi's sister Eva salve. He had a salve that he would put on the knee, let's say. And my daddy used to say by the time he got to the door, he couldn't feel it anymore. George Washington Carver went out into the woods one time, spent 7 days there, came back with 52 inventions. And when they asked him, they said, well, who taught you this? You didn't know it before you went in there.
Right.
Who taught you this? He said, nature talked to me.
That's right.
And they made a big joke about it.
That's right.
But you know something? Nature did talk to him. But nature talked to him the way an African can interpret nature that these Indo-Europeans just can't get. Because nature ain't talking to them. Nature talking ice. Yeah, come on up here. I got something for you. And I'm really going to do something to you, because I'm going to let you come up here when the weather's a little bit, it ain't that cold. And then I'm going to send up underneath you, because all ice ages start underground. And they travel underground, and then they freeze as they come up. So what actually happened during the Worm Ice Age is that out of Greenland, because just like every hurricane comes off the west coast of Africa, every ice age comes from Greenland. But it comes underground. It's not coming at you. You don't see it. It comes underground. It freezes the ground, and then it creates that relationship of the ice and the snow and all the rest of that. And so what happened is that nature played a trick on these African prodigal sons that decided to leave paradise and travel into the northern areas. And so they came up underneath, and then all of a sudden, you have those mountains that if you look at a map and you look at the northern climate, you'll see you have the Himalayas, and you have the Pyrenees. You have a lot of mountains in the northern area. They became ice mountains, almost like prisons that you couldn't get past. So you couldn't travel south. You had to and so you had a choice. You either stand in the cold,
Or keep going.
you keep going north, which you got to stop somewhere,
Right.
or you go in the caves.
Wow.
Or that's the other option, you die. There's an interesting thing. There's a Dutch scholar named Ohns, O-H-N-N-E-S. And he studied the impact of ice or cold on the human organism and animals. And he found that at a certain temperature, your skin, like when they say that your skin will freeze, right? Frostbite. Well, on another level, on a mental level, it'll freeze your pineal gland. Okay? And it'll calcify your pineal gland. Now, what do you think of when you think of a pineal gland? Okay. Think of a grape. Plump, juicy grape. And then you put it in the sun. It'll become a raisin. It'll become sun-dried.
It will dry.
The pineal gland in the ice became freeze-dried. So when you see them act the way they act, they ain't thawed out yet. And so, family, we're looking for a person to act in a way that they are not capable of. So you're looking for honor and integrity. You're not going to get it. My mama said you ain't going to get water from a rock, blood from a turnip, or morality from a European. And Dr. Edwin Nichols, in his study of African people, and this is why what's happening now is very impactful for melanated people, because he breaks it down into an axiology. He has the African, axiology is your worldview, how you see things, how you perceive life around you according to your cultural common sense. Dr. Nichols says African people are the type of people that we are person to person. Okay, we build our societies person to person. We like to hang out on the street and talk to each other and have that conversation. Person to person. We build, because out of our person to person relationship builds the community relationships that creates the society and then hence the civilization. Asian is person to group relationship. They work for the group. It's not about the workers talking to each other. It's about, I'm working for the restaurant. I'm working for the computer company. I'm working for politics. It's not a person-to-person relationship. It's a person-to-group relationship. And in the European perspective, is person to material wealth. What can you do for me? It's transactional. How many times did we hear that over the past 5 years about the former president being a transactional person? Okay, what about I like you? It's not about I trust you or respect you. What can you do for me? And that's what I'm going to base my relationship on you with. And you see, as African people, we people-to-people kind of people, right? And so we're on the job, and we're talking to all of our colleagues, and we're just going back and forth with them, having a great time. We're talking about our children. They showing us pictures of their children. I'm speaking about people of European descent. Showing us pictures of their children. I'm showing them pictures of my children, and we're talking about all the things that we did. 12 o'clock come, we go to lunch. You're walking down the street. You see your worker right there. They walk past you like they didn't even know you. Because they objectify you. We get insulted. Because we're person to person. And so we think, hey, all this talk we did, and you're going to walk past me like you don't know me? But they're not doing it for any other reason, but that's their nature. And so what's the answer? I objectify them. I'll walk by you. Well, first of all, I really don't want to talk to you. And I'm not saying that family as like antagonistic towards them. I'm not saying that. I have met good people in all concepts, and I don't want to get caught up in an absolute, because that's very dangerous when you get caught up in absolute. I'm looking at them as a group. As a group, I don't want no part of you. You don't ever have to worry about CRT and me. I ain't never going in your neighborhood unless I got to get somewhere else and I got to go through it. I don't want to eat in your restaurants. I don't want to eat your food. It's nasty, ain't it? But we have to come to certain decisions about ourselves. And we have to teach ourselves. And the reason why I started with that agricultural concept was because my presentation tonight was going to be discussing concepts about what I developed in terms of a curriculum to teach our children. And I'll do this within the time that I have. Because my brother, you said about 10 minutes before the hour. Because I want to stay within your time. I'll do it within your time.
You could go to 9.
Good, okay. Okay. So, what I have, And what I'd like to do is I'd like to go around this way. And for those of you who may not be able to see, you know, I don't know how close you want to get with each other. You know, I don't want to do that. But I'll talk you through what it is that I'm talking about, okay? And so, my thing, very simple, is tell the children the truth so they can fix things. Preparing our children and community for the 21st century. This is what I call the children of George Washington Carver. Holistic teaching and learning, back to nature, intercurricular and intracurricular teaching and learning. Intercurricular means that you are holistically bringing in different subjects, be it biology, chemistry, mathematics, arts and crafts, music, physical education. Inter. And then intra means that within that discipline, there are areas that you are going to connect. Because the bottom line in education is just simple this. Connecting neurons. Connecting nerve cells in your brain. And what you're attempting to do when you're talking to a child, or talking even as I speak with you, what I'm attempting to do is to connect your nerve cells with each other. And the more ways that I can connect your nerve cells, the more pathways of genius you have to be able to recollect things that you need in life. So, what I used to do with my children, when I would teach them math concepts in the 2nd grade, part of their homework was not just to do 5 problems. I would say, draw it. Draw math. Because your left brain, your left side of your brain is analytical. That's where your math is, that's where your science is, your reasoning. The other side of your brain, the right side of your brain, is your analogical. That's where your musician is, your artist.
Creativity.
It's the creative area of the brain. So that if I'm teaching you a math concept, I want to activate something on the other side of your brain. I just don't want you to be mathematical. And see, this is why we give a lot of credit to all these so-called smart people, but they're not really that smart. When I taught college, I taught engineering students in college. And I taught science majors and math majors. I was in the Black Studies department. And I taught the Introduction to Ancient Africa. I taught a course on Africans in Asia, Africans in Europe. And every year I taught a course on Malcolm X. I had students have to withdraw from my class because their brain couldn't function from a sociological perspective. Genius in engineering, genius in math, but they had problems reading a chapter in a book because they hadn't activated that part of the brain. So we have to do this with our children young. And as it relates to culture, we got to do this young. Because for my students in college to be in Black Studies and learn about their history and culture when they're in college is equivalent to giving a marathon runner water in the 25th mile.
Wow.
It's good, but they need it in the 2nd mile. They need a little refreshment in the 4th mile.
Right.
And that's what we do in our schools. We have to get this into our children when they're young and to build their neurons. I went to Mexico with Dr. Van Sertem in '84. And the first thing that Doctor said to us that night, the first night that we were in Mexico, he said, my job tonight is to clear up the nonsense that's been written on the chalkboards of your mind. And I thought about that. Because that experience we had with him in the month of July fundamentally and foundationally changed the way in which you thought. Same way I spoke about Dr. Lewis when he presented the Africans in Asia. There were people in that room, they were never the same again. Because they didn't see it. The neuron wasn't connected. So what you want to do is connect neurons. Let me give you an example. We turn off all these lights. Can't see a thing in the room. You find the light switch, light goes on, you see the chairs, the table, the computer, the books. the kente cloth. My question to you is, did all those things appear in the room when you turned the light on? No, they were always there. Your light just wasn't on. And that's what knowledge is. No matter what you leave this room with knowing, that you think you did not know coming in, no, you knew it. All I did was facilitate you knowing that you already knew it. How could I put anything in your head that wasn't already there? And the way we set the classroom up is like, I'm coming in with all this pontification of knowledge and I'm going to bequeath upon you all this brilliance that I have. No, all I'm going to do is remind you, you already know it. And if you talk to your students in that manner, they automatically begin to accept and assimilate information from that perspective. Oh, yeah, I know that. And once they know it, then they can know everything. Because you were born with everything. Check this out. Let me speak to the sisters. It applies to the brothers too, but I want to talk to the sisters as it relates to the feminine energy. When your grandmother was born, your grandmother was born with every egg that she would ever have in her life. Some would mature, some would exit, and some would give birth. Now, if that's true, that your grandmother was born with every egg she produced, when your grandmother was born, so was your mother. Because your mother's egg was within your grandmother when she was born. But if that's true, when your grandmother was born, and your mother was born with her, so were you. Because your mother, in her position, had your egg too. Just like brothers, she had our eggs too. But if that's true for your grandmother, that has to be true for all of the women in your line going back to the earliest of the human organisms and even beyond that. If, this is in math, this is called exponential expansion equation. Exponential expansion equation. You're born with a mother and a father, 4 grandparents, 8 great-grandparents. Okay? Let me take you back 20 generations. Some people say a generation is 20 years, some people say it's 25 years, some people say it's 30 years. It don't make a difference to me how many years you counted. But let's just say for the roundabout way, let's just say it's 20-year generation. And I take you back 20 generations, which would be the year 1621. 1621 to this point right here in your life, when we're talking about ancestors, and we're thinking about ancestors, and if we even think we're alone, if I took you back 400 years, it took 1,048,576 human beings to bring you into existence. Now we're talking math here, it's not personal. And I'm not just throwing this out. If you go back and you have 2 parents, you have 4 grandparents, you have 8 great-grandparents, and you go back 20 generations. But 1,048,576 human beings for the past 400 years as they move through their life, here we are right now. I only took you back 400 years and you have 1,048,000. Suppose I took you back to Africa 2 million years ago. How many people you think dwell in you? And we think we're alone? What I just told you is the strength that our ancestors worked on the plantation with. When they said praise God, they were praising forces that they understood and that they knew. And they never gave up. No matter what, they never gave up. Sometimes when I have a dream that I'm having a hard time, I wake up and apologize.
That's right.
To even think what our ancestors went through for us. And when I think of what they did, when they were on the plantations and they knew through some divine sense They didn't give up. They kept on going. They kept on living no matter what they faced. Murder, mayhem, rape. You know, I think of the scene that the brother did in Birth of a Nation, the second one, where the scene is, you all saw it, or have a sense of it? Okay, so you know what I'm talking about. As a man, I think of this scene, and as a woman, I imagine it, that you are being brought up to the big house to please a person of European descent.
Right.
And as a man, that's my woman that I love and that I feel I have a relationship with. And I sit up underneath that window and I know what's going on up there.
Right.
When she comes out and they embrace each other, like the man saying, darling, I don't care what he did to you. I'm your man. And she said, I don't care what he did to me. You're my man. That is black love. That's a type of love that there are no words for. And our ancestors in Kush Kemet had a term. And again, I guess it could be made more accurate. But the term is Hemet Neset Waret. Hemet Neset Waret. It's a metaphor. And the metaphor, when you describe it, I'm going by my brother Mfudishi. Okay? And his explanation to me about what this means. When you try to speak English, it says that your Hemet Neset Waret, your woman, the sister that sits with you, beside you on that throne when you are ruling, is the deep well of water that you return to when you're parched by the desert. Now, there's a difference between being parched and being thirsty. For those of you who have been in the desert, you know what it's like to be parched. Think of how we thought of our women long before we called them to be, and long before we call them all of these derogatory terms. They were the deep well of water that we went to, we returned to, when we were parched by the desert. Now, if you've ever been parched, then you know how you're going to feel. And when you're parched by the desert, there's only one thing you're thinking about, and that's water. But not only is she water, she's a well. But not only is she a well, she's a deep well of water. The metaphor says that the sister that you choose, or the man that the sister chooses, is that person that you go to when all else has failed. And she will fix what's wrong with you. When we look at gender issues, we have to reconnect our neurons. Because nations are built by people, but dynasties are built by families. And we have to get to a certain point, family, where we understand the conditions we're in. Clearly. We have all the books, we have all the scholars, we have all the information we need. But what is it that's stopping us? It has to be psychological.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
It's not for lack of knowledge. It may be a lack of interest, but it's not a lack of knowledge. The books are there. In all of the 10 areas that I've explained. Still with us, we have Queen Afua, who is doing phenomenal work for all of us, specifically our sisters, but all of us. Sister Ma'at, Dr. Sabi's wife. Look at our brother, Dr. Laila. How about Dr. Paul Goss? We got this, family. We got this. But we have been put in a position for so long that we don't know really and truly how great we are. We really don't understand that. Because if we did, we would not be in this right now. Because don't tell me about you gonna take power. You know, I'm gonna take back power. No, you ain't gonna take no power. Look what they did with the power. You wanna take that? No, you wanna assume power. You have the power. But you gotta make a choice. And I say, let's make the choice in regards to the children. I do not do what I do for my ancestors. I do what I do for the children. I do what I do through my ancestors, but for the children. I don't have to do something for them. They already did that for me. So now I'm going to pass it forward. I'm going to pay forward and not pay back. Family, we've got this. That's what I've come to tell you. We got this. Now let's get it. Hope that. Okay, we're going to have Dr. Kaba a break with him. We're going to have a break. Got coffee, croissants. Anybody want a little soup? Just come over here. If you haven't donated, you can still get a chance to donate. But we're going to have a little 10-minute break. And give yourself a big hand. Thank you very much. The audience, one question from the Zoom. One question from the audience, one question from the Zoom. Okay, so he's going to speak until he says it's time to do
Q&A.
Q&A. Anybody from the Zoom, if they want my Cash App, if you want to help the Mackey's group, is on the chat. Thank you very much for your donation, supporting the Mackey's group. I hope you enjoyed the soup and the festivities. And give yourself a big hand, and we're going to return with Dr. Kaba. Thank you very much. Family, I know that we get into these conversations and I don't get a chance to say everything that I want, but I'm glad I can get this opportunity to talk to you about just how I wanted to just round this out. One of the things that is very important is image. Image is very important, particularly with children. And like I say, I've taught every grade, I've taught every subject. And when we are in the kindergarten and first grade, when we're teaching numbers to our children, one of the first things that we do is called number sense. And one of the things I've found in working with children is image. And I know that we get what's called manipulatives in school. And we have the children, they count sticks, and then they count bears, and they count all different kinds of things. But what I began to implement in my class was I began to take cultural things and I began to use them to count. You know when the baby's in the crib and you got that mobile going around? One of the first things we need to do in a business is find someone that's going to make certain mobiles for us. Put some ankhs up there and dinkra symbols. The music that they played is not, rockabye baby, but put some olatunji in there. Okay? Because everything that baby's doing is perceiving its environment. And they're using their senses. That's why you see a child will bang their head to feel it. They'll smell it. They'll put it in their mouth. Okay? Because they're testing whatever it is in their life to get a sense of what it is. Image is very important. Those mobiles, we need brothers and sisters to create mobiles that will have African images because that's the first thing that infant's looking at. And it should be them. You might have pictures of the family members that are going around. There's so much that you can do. Melanated people are attracted to colors. And it becomes important to understand the role that colors play in perception with children. But as it relates to counting, I went into contract with a company that creates what's called tubes. And these are Egyptian Kemetic Kush symbols. It is not from an African perspective. However, it is valuable in the images to count, for our children to begin to count things that reflect them. And so in my first grade classes, I bought however many. And we would count this. We would count Nefertiti. We would count Bastet the cat. We would count the scarab beetle. Okay, there are 12 different things. Normally you start with the base 10 system. You can use these to have a child count. But not only that, but there's one image here that is a pyramid that has 3 pyramids. That's how you teach multiplication. Because once you have 3 of something, then you teach multiples of 3, and then from multiples of 3, you can then teach the multiples of everything else. And so as we're looking, I am contract, so I didn't get a chance to tell you this when you were looking at the books and things like that. And I felt because of Kwanzaa, you might be interested, you might have a child that you know that you might also do that. So this is a little commercial for the tubes, which are images for our children to start to count. We have to start showing our children their images. And Jinka symbols, Kush Kemetic symbols. I'm talking to a group of brothers that do jewelry, and they're interested in developing. The thing is that it has to be inexpensive, because you need, I would say you need at least a couple to be able to count. So I'm working with some brothers that make jewelry, that do the molds, and we may be able to do these and even more. But to round out the conversation, family, then we'll go into question and answer. Like I said, I don't write books because I'm a writer. I write books because I have something to say. And the 3 books that I produced, I call the Trinity. Because the book I wanted to write was Shabaka Stone. That's the book I wanted to write. I've been wanting to write that book since 1977, when my mother brought home a Xerox copy of Stolen Legacy. This was before it came back out. And she brought home, because I had written a book on Ethiopia, and she had said to me, the people in the Xerox, because my mother worked for a major oil company, she was a secretary, and you would take things down to the Xerox room. Most of them were brothers and sisters that worked in the Xerox room. And my mother would bring down things, but she also brought my book down for them to make copies of, so that I would have multiple copies of what I was doing. And so one day my mother went down to pick something up that I had asked, and she said to me, they said to her, your son wrote this? And she said, yeah. She said, and the brother told my mother, well, if your son writes this, he'll like this. And that was a copy of Stolen Legacy. And from that point on, when I got to chapter 8, I knew I had to do something with this. And so that's when I began the thought of Shabaka Stone. But as I unraveled and learned history and culture and the things that go into cosmology, I began to realize that there was another piece that had to be put in place that would assist in the explanation of what I was saying in Shabaka Stone. And that is where spirituality before religions came. Shabaka was a 25th dynasty pharaoh, Neset Beti, the one who has the right to rule. And around 710 BC, give or take, he came upon a document called the Memphite Theology. And he said that this was a work of his ancestors, and that it was so important that he wanted to write it for all time. So he instructed his scientists to copy the Memphite Theology with additional information that had been learned over time to this stone, which is now in the British Museum. It's 3 feet by 4 feet, 3.4 feet by 4.8 feet, so it looks like a rectangle. And it's not the whole document. It's not the whole thing. But Shabaka spent 2 lines in Meduneter honoring his ancestors who had first written it. And then he had 3 philosophies that explain how the universe came into existence and how it continues. And he introduced to us the pattern of the tabernacle, as above, so below. When I was writing the Trinity, the reason why I wrote Professor Hanbury was because I wanted to do in this time what Shabaka did in his time. So before I even started, I paid homage to my ancestor, William Leo Hansberry. That's why it's called an intellectual libation, to William Leo Hansberry. And when you read this book about this man's life, family, what this man went through, this man created maps in Ethiopia that never existed.
That's right.
Never existed. He and the students got together and literally drew it. He had art students and other people actually draw lithographs and graphs and maps of Ethiopia that the European world never respected us enough to do. He did it. And he did it over a period of time. This brother did so much work, he never had a chance to produce his own writing. And so he did not produce a book. Now, Joseph Harris, brilliant brother who shared a room with William Leo Hansberry. William Leo Hansberry was retiring in '59, and Dr. Joseph Harris was coming in as a young professor. They shared the same room. And out of this, the influence that William Leo Hansberry had on Joseph Harris made Dr. Harris go back and take out, so there's 2 books that Joseph Harris wrote on William Leo Hansberry, Pillars in Ethiopian History, and Africa and Africans as seen by the classical writers. It's William Leo Hansberry's writing, but it's Joseph Harris's bringing out his information. I went to the same house to study the life and times of William Leo Hansberry. I had a chance to work with Chancellor Williams in 1984 when I was writing this, because Chancellor Williams was a student of William Leo Hansberry. Okay? Nnamdi Azikiwe was a student of William Leo Hansberry. Kwame Nkrumah used to go from Lincoln University to Washington, D.C. to sit at the feet of William Leo Hansberry. This is who William Leo Hansberry was, because he was not just an educator. Nnamdi Azikiwe gives William Leo Hansberry the credit for shaping his political mind through education, so he would come back to become the first prime minister and president of Nigeria. Kwame Nkrumah's concept. Say
Ghana?
that again?
Wasn't that Ghana?
No, Ghana was Kwame Nkrumah.
Oh, okay.
Nnamdi Azikiwe
Oh, okay. Now-
was Nigeria.
Right.
I said that right, didn't I?
Right.
Oh, okay,
That's
I just
right.
want to make sure.
Said it right.
It slips sometimes, you know. It's all right. I'm human. There are many people that came and studied with him. You know the African American Institute down on 44th Street? William Leo Hansberry started that. But they split because they wanted to make money and he wanted to create an institute. So Africa House remained in Washington, D.C. That's where Kwame Nkrumah used to come to study with William Leo Hansberry at Africa House. They got on William Leo Hansberry during World War II. The Italian Prime Minister and ambassador complained about William Leo Hansberry because they had dispatched a team that included Ralph Bunche. It included J.A. Rogers, that went and reported on what the fascists were doing in Ethiopia, that changed the way in which the world was looking at Italy. If he created a number of things, this brother was not just education, not only political, he was social. He was known as
Pan-African Congress.
Pan-African Congress. Another thing, he was invited by Du Bois. And Du Bois wrote a book, The World in Africa, and Dr. Du Bois was a little bit concerned about William Leo Hansberry because William Leo Hansberry was so meticulous in his research that if he wanted to make a point, he had to find 3, 4, and 5 different references that would prove him correct. And Du Bois said, look, if after 2, you're all right. You know, William Leo Hansberry said, no, you got to be meticulous because they're going to come after us. And that's something I learned in my research. That's why you hear me quoting all these books to you. Because I want you to know this is not just me talking. This is the study of the people I've studied that has brought this information to us. We're not alone in this. And I don't want anyone to think it's me. It's us. And it's things that we have to start to do, family. We have the ability to do it. Many of us are doing it. But we just have to know what our potential is. We've got to rearrange our neurons in the way in which we're thinking. And if you want to start, if you like to march, go ahead and march. But march to the nearest African American on the store. If you want to march, okay, don't march in the middle of the street because they'll stop you. March where you need to march, go to that store and purchase. The vendors you see on the street, they're all small black businesses. And as we support them, they'll grow. And as they grow, they'll offer more services. We need to do our own research because we wouldn't be tripping over this, whatever we want to call this thing we're going through, if we had our own researchers doing our own research for our bodies, because that's why they use white mice, because white mice will give them the results that they need as albinoid people. We need to do this. There was a sister, when she saw my webinar on Henrietta Lacks, she contacted me, she said that she had been using HeLa cells for years and never knew how powerful. She knew they were powerful, but she never knew. They hid HeLa, they gave another woman that name, like her name was Henrietta Lacks, H-E-L-A. But the HeLa that they used was a different name to offset what was going on. Then somebody slipped in the 70s, and that's when the family found out what they were doing. They took her cells in space. They multiplied. Here's what it is. Her cells multiply, and not only do they multiply, but they speed up the process. They're immortal. They can't die. They're multiplying at a point where they're saying it's mystical. It ain't mystical. That's black magic. That's who we are as a people.
Which is mystical.
This is who we are.
So how much did they pay the family?
They ain't paid them a dime yet.
Nothing.
Because I had an interview with Ron Lacks. If you go up, Ron Lacks, her grandson wrote a book about the true history of Henrietta Lacks. And he and I had a conversation. And what they did to that family, they did it to all of us.
That's right. Yeah.
That's what they do.
This,
That's what they do.
what did Dr. Sharkey McIntyre say? They act the way they act because they act the way they act.
What Elijah Muhammad said.
It's the bottom, but after all these years, when are we going to get it? But check this out. When they took her cells into space, they multiplied quicker in space than they do on Earth. This is their research. Over 700,000 papers have been written on HeLa cells since that woman died. Jonas Salk was exposed to HeLa cells, went down to Tuskegee Institute, and within 7 months, they had the vaccine for polio. Almost everything that happens in science, they use HeLa cells for. But make no mistake, if you go to prison, they're using your cells too. Just read the book Acres of Skin about the Philadelphia prison and what they did to those who were in prison. They don't have to make you go into the hospital to get you. All they got to do is incarcerate you. And every time you get sick, they're taking your cells. But can you imagine if we had our genius doctors understanding what our cells did for us? Do you know where we'd be? We'd be super sapient. What Dr. Richard King calls Homo perfectus. Supernatural. Extraordinary. I'm not talking about no Twilight Zone.
No.
I'm talking about the potential of the human spirit and the potential of what humans can be if they only knew who they really were and not being interfered by all these distractions.
That's right.
We're being distracted, and this virus is only another thing that they got us fighting each other over. And if we had our own scholars doing our own research, we wouldn't be fighting each other because we know what we have to do. Vaccines came from Africa. Africans had vaccines. It's according to how you're going to use the word, though, because we're using English, and Malcolm told us that it uses the language of liars. So it's according to how you want to use the word. Africans had a way that if there was an invading organism, they told you two things. There are two types of vaccines. There is a preventative vaccine, and there's a curative vaccine. A preventative vaccine is what Dr. Laila Africa and Dr. Sabi and Sister Ma'at and Queen Afua is trying to get us to understand. If you prepare your body, then whenever an invading organism comes in, your body will take care of it through its immune system.
Right.
And the first line of defense is your skin. You have the white blood cells in your blood system. Every system, there is no immune system, but every system has its way of immunity. So be it your skeletal system, your respiratory system, your muscular system, your central nervous system, all of them have their own immune system, but there is no such thing as like an immune system. But every part of your body has immunity. And so these are the kinds of things that we have to wonder about and talk about and begin to develop. We've got to get our own young people up into this and to understand. And just to put it in the capsule, and we'll stop and we'll start dialogue. The program that I created for those that were working on a farm was to study melanin. But the first step in studying melanin is astronomy. Family, solar power is the future wealth of the planet. And isn't it interesting that everywhere where the sun shines the brightest, the people are the most melanated? It's like the Creator put wealth in our back. There'll be no air you can put at the end of your name. Millionaire, billionaire, trillionaire. When you tap into the sun, there is an abundance. You won't, it's like Mansa Musa. When Mansa Musa traveled the world, he broke the World Bank. Our perception of wealth is limited by the ignorance of those who are in charge now, because they're limited. But our ancestors built the pyramids because of the sun. They built the Tekanus because of the sun. They built their temples because of the sun. They called themselves children of the sun. They understood solar power. I know a group in San Francisco that are working with children where they have attaché case where the children are building solar panels inside the attaché case. And so they just go in their backyard and open it up. They're taking trips to Africa, opening up their attaché case, and the power comes down and they can light up a house. If I told you what solar power could do compared to what Con Ed is trying to get you to understand. See, what they're trying to do right now, they're trying to figure out how to monetize solar power. And the sun is saying, you can't touch this. I shine on everybody. And you don't have a right to try to enslave me like you enslave them. You don't enslave solar power. And so we have access to solar power, and we have to teach solar power. But if you want to understand melanin, which is the molecule, because Dr. Sabi used to always say, how good to you? You're always talking about melanin. You got to talk about carbon. And that's why my next book is called Carbon Before Melanin. Because you got to understand carbon and what carbon does in the universe and on Earth. Dr. John G. Jackson says you have 4 basic elements. You have many others, but 4 basic elements. And by the way, you know, a lot of people get tripped up with what's the difference between an atom and an element. You know, what's the difference between? Let me put it to you like this. I'm going to take you to an ice cream store. An atom is the flavors of ice cream. The element is the scoop of ice cream. So you have chocolate flavor, that's the atom. But when you take a scoop of that, that becomes the element. Same thing, but one is a description and one is the actual element itself. Now, you have multiple, you know, like cones where you put multiple scoops of ice cream. Well, when you put multiple scoops of ice cream, that's the molecule. Very simple. A very simple way to understand science. But when you're dealing with a superficial people, they don't know how to explain things. Because they don't understand it themselves. Not really. And so when you look at melanin, when you look at the power of what melanin can do, you've got to tie that back to Henrietta Lacks. Now, here's the last thing. This Sunday, I am doing my next webinar. This webinar is going to be on Dr. May Carol Jemison. Because you've got to understand what that sister did and what she represents. In the beginning of the space program, and now you're going to understand why they sent our brother Strayhorn up the other day. Yeah, Lloyd, not Lloyd, oh my goodness, my man, numerology. Michael, thank you. Yeah,
Straight hand.
Thank you. Okay. Strahan, Michael Strahan, the football player.
Yes.
Okay. There's a reason why they sent him up.
Oh, really?
Okay. Now some people might disagree with me. I understand. I'm going to go with you, but I'm going to tell you the story.
Okay.
Anyway, because this is what happened. In the beginning, the astronauts were European males.
That's right.
Then they sent up African American men. Buford, I believe.
Guy Buford.
Guy
Guy Buford.
Thank you.
And
Say again?
McNeil.
Yes, also. But unfortunately, brother joined the ancestors, so what I'm about to tell you couldn't happen. Then they sent up European female, and then they sent up Mae Jacobson. Now I'm going to talk science to you, the same person. When a European male goes up into space, this is what I'm going to talk to you about on Sunday. I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. When they sent him up into space, he came back in zero gravity when you start to float. There is a dynamic relationship between your pelvic or your groin region and the ground because of gravity. Okay? Your body learns how to live because gravity keeps you centripetal and centrifugal force. The force that throws out or pulls in, and the force that throws in or pulls out. The combination of that, ma'at, makes you walk on the earth. Otherwise you'd all float, like we do when we get out into space. When the European male went into space, there was a reasonable and sizable deformation in bone density.
That's right.
Okay? When you start to float and you no longer have that relationship, something happens in the groin area. Okay. They said, the brother, there was much less bone deformation, almost no problem at all. But there was a difference in the bone formation. Then they sent a European female up. This is their science telling you this. There was much more bone deformation than the African man, but a little less than the European male. And then they sent up Mae Jacobson. And I'm going to tell you what her portfolio was up in space. Okay, I got to leave a little bit for it. Her portfolio, what her job was to study bone deformation in zero gravity.
Wow.
That was in her portfolio. That was her job to do. And she also worked with HeLa cells while she was up there. But when she came back down to Earth and they examined her, there was no bone deformation in Mae Jacobson. A few months later, they wrote an article that said the strongest person on the planet biologically is the black woman. But they didn't publicize it. They just did it in terms of the science. When you look at Mae Jacobson, see, this is why I have to do this, because my webinars reflect my book, Shabakasno. Every webinar is examining a chapter in the book because I want to expand on the concept. And I have a chapter in Shabakasno on DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid. And what I wanted to do was to just do a chapter. But as I started doing research, I began to say, no, I can't even do this without adding something on Henrietta Lacks. And then I started studying Henrietta Lacks, and then that sent me to Dr. Mae Jacobson. And I said, well, I can't do that either. So I had to take 3 different subjects and do it over 3 months in order to help our community understand exactly how great we are family. The man and the woman, the male energy and the female energy is there. We are a great people, and they are deathly afraid of our existence. And when you think about winning, you say, well, are we going to win? And as Richard Spencer said, it's about winning. My concept to Richard Spencer was, well, what is winning? What are you going to win? And there was no response. Because every morning that a black person wakes up, you won. They got to watch. We got the time. Don't ever forget that. All we got to do is keep on keeping on. And our ancestors laid out the path, family. And I swear to you, if they weren't willing to give up what they went through to bring us here, they manifested us. Spiritually, they manifested us when they did what they did. When they said that they weren't going to do it, go down, they weren't going to commit suicide, they weren't going to give up. Every time they hoped for something, they were hoping for us, and here we are. And now what we got to do is we got to manifest our future. Because I'm not looking for the next 20 years. I got a 100-year plan. I have a century plan. And my question is to us, where do we see us and our children in the year 2121? Where do you want to see us? And make a plan to that. Let that be your end object, and everything else you do be the stars that are closer to you before you get to the star you're really aiming at. We got this, family. All we got to do is manifest it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Any questions, comments? Please, brother.
What's all this scientific talk about graphene and graphite? They say this is going to be the new mineral. I understand it's half the weight of steel and 10 times as strong. Are you familiar with graphene and graphite?
Who's talking about it?
Scientists are talking about
White people?
it. Yeah.
I have no idea what they're talking about. Because I don't think they know what they're talking about. I know in terms of graphite, which is another form of the blackness, you know, I mean, you have various forms of carbon, like graphite, coal, things like that. But I'm not familiar with that concept.
Okay.
And anything they say, I listen, okay? I don't negate, but like, no, I'm sorry, I can't handle that anymore. That's a waste of time. Please, brother.
Brother, you mentioned neurons several times.
Yes, yes.
Can you explain what telomeres are?
Telomeres,
Telomeres.
telomeres.
Okay, telomeres.
Okay. And it's funny because in my webinar, I have a whole section on those concepts. And I want to be careful how I define it. But telomeres are very important in terms of the structure of life. This is how I want to break it down instead of getting particular, because I still have work to do myself in studying this. But telomeres are extremely important. Just by the word T-E-L-E, even though it's an English word, it becomes very important. And when you're dealing with telomeres, when you're dealing with neurons, these are the things that build up in your system and they structure the very nature of your thoughts. Let me stop there for a moment. Dr. Lewis, did you want to add to this? Because there's a specificity that you can add. And please, brother, if you also, because when I have a point where I'm not, Dr. Ben made me feel real good one day. Dr. Ben told me I have a right to say I don't know.
That's right.
Please.
At this point, I'm set. At this point, I'm learning.
Okay. Okay. My brother, did you want to speak on what telomeres are to you?
Yeah, the reason I'm saying I wanted you to elaborate on the importance of telomeres because you can look at a person's telomeres and literally determine how long they're going to live, the likelihood of how long they're going to live based on the length of their telomeres. And you was talking about the importance of neurons being together.
That's right.
And I just said, wow, telomeres got to be longer and they have to be together also. And you could basically predict how long a person's going to live based on their telomeres.
When you are born, just like we talked about your grandmother that was born with it, you were born before the earth existed. You know, I know people like to go back as far as the human family, but after you get through the mammalian stage, I want to take you to when you were a reptile. There's something known as hydroconium. Hydroconium is the mammal, the original mammal that we as a people came from. They were about the size of the top digit of your pinky. And they rested somewhere between the water and the land. And they were mammals. They were the beginnings of mammals. But they were coming out of the reptilian level. Okay? So in the beginning, life basically was bacteria.
Right.
Okay? And then out of bacteria, now you have botanical life. And then out of botanical life, you're now going to get into what's called basically vertebrates or invertebrates, without a backbone, and then you have with backbone.
And the sun playing a role.
The sun played the role the whole time. The sun was the reason why it happened in the first place. The earth at one time, you know, was part of the sun. And at some point, the sun threw pieces of itself off. This is where Genesis comes from. Threw pieces of itself off. But because of centripetal and centrifugal force, the sun's ability threw out these gaseous balls, but had pulled it back. Centrifugal force. In outer space, there's centripetal force that pushes things in, but pulls things out. So when you take centripetal and centrifugal force and you balance it, that is what created life on our Earth. But when our Earth was thrown away, okay, first you had, Neptune, because Pluto's not a planet. And they keep telling you that, but Pluto is not a planet. It can't be a planet. Because the 4 inner planets, my very educated mother, Kaba, just served us 9 pickles. Okay? My very educated mother, M stands for the closest planet to the sun, Mercury, okay? Very
Venus,
educated,
Earth,
mother,
Mars,
comma. Can't leave that comma out, because the comma separates the first part of the phrase of the sentence from the second. So what do you think that comma is? What separates what is just? Jupiter. What separates Mars from Jupiter? The asteroid belt. Okay? That's the comma in the sentence. Just served us 9. Just served us 9. Okay. Pluto's not a planet because the 4 inner planets on the other side of the asteroid belt are solid. When you get beyond the asteroid belt, all of those are gas, except for Pluto, who's about the quarter size of our moon and circles around Neptune. Because up until 1998, Neptune was the furthest planet from the sun. And then Pluto came back around and then was the furthest out. But Pluto's not a planet. But that's a whole nother thing. I tell children all the time, if they ask you, Pluto's a planet. Don't get the answer wrong just because you know the truth. So, going back to the telomeres. The telomeres have the ability at the end of the neuron, the way telomeres are constructed, they literally will shape what it is that they're attempting to shape. They're normally at the end of the DNA. And they're developing themselves, and they'll tell you how long you're going to live, they'll tell you how you're going to live, they'll tell you how you're going to look. They are telling you something. They are telegraphing you something. And they're talking to you. And in my DNA webinar, I have sections on the telomeres. Because I was wondering, why are they spending so much time talking about telomeres? Because in DNA, I'm thinking about, the different concepts of your DNA strand. Adenine, cytosine, guanine, thymine. That's the voice of God. When they say the word, when they say atum in the Shabaka stone, it's adenine, cytosine, guanine, thymine. Science. That's why that book is called Spirituality is Unseen Science, and Science is Seen Spirituality. Our people didn't believe in God. They didn't have faith in God. They knew God. There's a difference. You can lose your faith and you can stop believing. But once you know, you know. And if you try to not know, then that's what's called cognitive dissonance. And then you have mental problems thinking. Because what you thought was true, you come to realize it's not true. And so you have a challenge. Now, the telomeres are important from what my research is because they shape the actual individual. Those 1,048,576 human beings, all that has to do with telomeres, but please don't stop on this earth. And when you think about when you join the ancestors, and you say you want to come back to earth, what makes you think you're going to stay in this galaxy? You remember the movie that came out about, and her name was, what was it, Eve? With what, Scarlett Johansson?
Lucy.
With Lucy? Okay, funny name that they gave her, Lucy. But at the end, when she had gotten to a point of all existence, and Morgan Freeman said, "Where are you?" What was her answer?
I'm everywhere.
I'm everywhere. And that's the answer. That's what's called a menta from the African Kush Kemetic perspective. A menta. Amen means the hidden Ta means land. Amenta, the hidden land, which spiritually is what we call heaven. Or I should say people call heaven. Our ancestors were geniuses. And they laid out a strategy of thought. It's called a pattern in the tabernacle. And they figured out how they got into existence. And what they noticed was that when they put a seed in the earth, a plant came forward. This plant, in its existence, grew, it aged, it died, it decayed, and next season it came back. That's how Africans created spirituality. It came from nature. They watched it. They said, wow, that is like when a man plants his seed in a woman. And then the baby comes forward like the plant comes out the earth. And then after it comes out the earth, it grows. It then dies. It decays. And then it'll resurrect itself. Because every religion, no matter where you see it, the purpose is for the resurrection of the soul. And the soul, from an ancient African perspective in the Spanish language, what does soul mean? That's what the Moors gave them. Soul. El Sol, the sun. In French, soleil. When you look at all the different languages that came out of the Latin context, that came out of the Greek context, Greek ain't a language. Greek came from Africa. There is no classical Greek. Classical Greek is nothing more or less than an alphabet system that they adapted from African. So when you look at that, what's called the Rosetta Stone, and they say the top is hieroglyphics, the next one is hieratic, and the next one is classical Greek, that's not classical Greek. That's another form of African writing that was adapted. English is not a language. Spanish is not a language. German is not a language. Because to be a language, you must have a specific cipher system or alphabet that reflects that language. English uses Greek script. It's not a language. Spanish uses Greek script. It's not a language. German speaks is not a language because it doesn't have a script specific to that language. This is just science, family. This is right. Remember I told you about the lights? Ain't nothing I'm telling you that you didn't already know. That's why you're saying, aha. This is an aha moment. When you say aha, it means I knew it all the time, but you just brought it to my attention. So what am I saying? I'm saying that when we write English, that's an African script because I can show you where in Medunetta the A of the vulture was taken out. And they said, instead of me having to draw a vulture every time I want to say the sound, I'm going to take a piece out, and it's going to shorten my having to do that. When you look at the M, which is an owl, you can see the script for the M in the horns. On the chest, there's the M. In the legs, there's the M. When you look at N, it's the wavy lines. That's where you get the N from. They just kind of pointed the lines out. The English language is an African Kushite language. And they say that we're illiterate. But here's what I want to say also. Sound. Sound is very important. And one of the most sacred sounds amongst Kush Kemets was Nga. Nga. Which is where the word negus comes from. Negus negusti. It was then Latinized and brought into the language to be negro or negra. It was then Europeanized to become negro. And then it was further contaminated for the N-word we have today.
Right.
Go up on YouTube. I was talking to a college class about the N-word. In fact, when I did that, to tell you how sharp our young people are, they created a day every year after that and invited me to come. And they invited me to come back because of the nature of that word that has become a pariah. I'm not one for telling people to use the word. I don't use the word myself.
Right.
Because I understand the pain that our people have been through in that word. So I don't use it. But that's a beautiful word. You see, because there was a lady, Helene Blavatsky, that, please remind me of my time, brother, because I know that I'm moving, brother. You know, like, I'm African.
10:30 we'll.
You got till 2 o'clock in the morning.
Oh, it's good. Oh, even 2 o'clock. If I had 3 lifetimes, I still would have to need a 4th, brother, because we have so much that we have to learn, so much we have to remember.
We're gonna
How do
bring
you
you back.
spell
brother.
that? How do you
Yeah.
spell that predecessor word, that grunt you just did, or whatever?
Inga.
How do you spell that?
NGR. Because vowels don't mean nothing.
Yeah.
In language, vowels only separate consonants because your mouth wouldn't be able to do it. The closest we have to the original language is the click language.
Yeah, Kosha.
Okay, yes.
Ah.
And not only that, but you know, my son used to always say when I would be listening to Lil Wayne and all that sort of stuff, I'd say, oh, I can't handle it. He'd say, yo, Dad, listen to the beats. See, I come from Smokey Robinson. Okay? I come from Marvin Gaye. I come from a time when words was what carried the song.
Oh yeah, lyrics.
But yes, but rap now, it's the beats. But listen to the beats and you'll hear the click language. In fact, when I heard, when somebody opened my eyes to this, you know, I have a DVD somewhere. It's called Out of Darkness. There's a section on the roots of rap music in Africa. And when I began listening, when I began to, well, what my son told me, he said, you know, Heru said, listen, yo, Dad, don't listen to the words, listen to the beats, because you know, your mind will get really upset with the words. So I started listening to the beats, and I wasn't listening to the words. And then I listened to Pata Pata by Miriam Makeba.
Oh, yeah.
And then I began to listen to Click. And I began to listen to that, but then I began to hear Beethoven, Moonlight Sonata. And then I began to hear Thelonious Monk on the piano and Oscar Peterson. There is a continuity in our history. I understand how we feel about the words being spoken in rap. I understand that, and I understand the psychological dimension of that. But if we just can isolate that for a moment and just focus on this particular point, the beats, Click, Moonlight Sonata, Straight No Chaser. Listen to the continuity from Beethoven to the original family, the Twa and Buti. The original human family from the Twa and Buti click language. You see, vowels are meant to separate consonants. So I say unga, unga. But in saying unga, I'm using an N, a sound of it, what we call a G, and an R. But when you put vowels in there, then it changes. Whether it be an A, E, I, or a U. Our ancestors built language around nature. So there was this bird that they saw, majestic bird that flew overhead. And the sound of the wings were hru, hru, hru. That's how it sounded to them. So what did they call the bird? Heru. The vulture. Ak, ak, ak. That became the sound for A. Ak, ak. Because that's what the vulture... So nature taught our ancestors how to talk. But Western civilization gets caught up in letters. That's why they screwed up the fraternities and sororities, because everybody's into, I'm an A, I'm a G, I'm an O. No, that's not what you are. If you're an alpha, you're a vulture. And so your symbol of the vulture, what is a vulture? A vulture is someone that would tear off her own leg to feed her child. Which means that you're willing to take from you to give to those who you brought into the world. That's the symbol of the alpha. But the Greeks got caught up in the A, so they call themselves alphas. Not realizing it's not the letter that's important, it's the sound. Don't we do that though? Really? As black folk. Don't we do that all the time? Okay, hey, check this out. Listen. African American vernacular language, also known as ebony phonics, also known as ebonics. Okay? Here it is. It's a perfectly structured language, and it's better than the European languages. Because Africans realize that the most precious thing you have is time. So they're not going to waste your time with words. So they say, I be going movies. Now in English you say, I go to the movies. The way the African mind structures it, I, subject, be, which is interesting because it's a part of a verb that is going to depend on what the next verb is going to do, going or gone. I be gone. Be gone is really two verbs, but for black folk is one. Think of the psychology, and then movies. Okay? You don't need to say the. Why am I saying the? Once I say movies, you know where I'm going. Movies. I be going movies. Okay. That's one way of saying it. Now, if you go to the movies a lot, Africans, well, Europeans will say, I go to the movies many times. Black folks say, no, I'm not going to add no more words. My voice is going to tell you that. So then, going back to language, we say, I'm going to the movies. Because we're going to put a stress on going, because that's the action that be is going to describe. I be going to the movies. Now, if I said that to you, you automatically know I do it more than one time.
Right.
Okay? Now, in European or in French or in any language, you want to take it to the next level because, you live in a movie house. You say, I go to the movie every day, every hour, all the time. I love the movies. That's where black folks say, I ain't going to add no more words, and I'm not necessarily going to change my voice, but my body's going to do it. Okay? Here, check it out. This is how black folk talk. This is when you talk about tenses and language, really, future, present, all the rest of that. Black folk don't do that. Black folk do it. I be going to movies. Okay? You know I go to movies. I be going to the movies. Okay? That's more than just regular. But now here's the third one that's going to take. I be going to the movies. Because our body is such that that's how we emphasize. I could be standing and watching two brothers or sisters, brother, sister, however, talking. I might not hear what they're saying. But if I can hear the intone of their voice, I know the emphasis they're putting on that conversation. They're not having a calm conversation. If I see that body, and when I see sister go like this on the Kimba, okay, I know somebody's in check now. Okay? I might not even understand what they're saying. But if I can watch that body language, black folk to black folk, we know what's going on in that conversation. Those are perceptive. So going back to your question, my brother. Inger, as it relates to the concept of something very special, but it's the sound. Very important sound. That's why it's the first thing that children say when they're born. Okay, for those that would like to try.
Too.
Say again?
That's a church sound too.
That is it. That's it. Okay, but when something tastes good, what do we say? Okay, when we get a good idea, what do we say? Okay, when something is wrong. But what does M do? What does the sound do? Okay, let me ask you to do this. I want you to make the sound. Okay? Okay, on the count of 3. We're going to do this in keys right here. Okay, Moja, okay, and Billy Tatu. Okay, Moja and Billy Tatu. Okay, now, I want you to search where in your head is tickling when you make that sound. See if you can search for it. Now, you might not be able to find it tonight, but practice. Moja and Billy Tatu. Search for where that sound is tickling inside of your head. It's right behind your olfactory bulb, where you smell. It's called, in Kemet, it was called Shitaytnfen. S-H-T-Y-T-N-T-F-N-D. It's called the sacred chamber. That part, that tickling, is sitting in dense cerebrospinal fluid being influenced by melanin. And when that happens, that vibrates. That area is where all of your senses meet. And by the way, you have 6 senses, not 5. Where your eyes see, ears hear, tongue taste, ear, did I say ears? Skin feels, nose smells, but your 6th sense is thinking. thinking is a sense. It's just not something abstract, and it's part of those senses. You have 3 eyes. When Grandma said, "You see what I'm talking about?" She wasn't talking about these eyes. She was talking about your, okay? You have 3 ears, okay? Ma say, "You hear what I'm saying?" She ain't talking about this. She's talking about your spiritual ear. You have 2 tongues. You have the physical tongue that tastes things that's in your mouth, and you have a spiritual tongue that tastes things that ain't nowhere near you. That don't taste right to me. When someone says something wrong, okay, you have 2 skins. You feel me? Okay? No, you ain't feeling me. But there's another kind of feel. Okay? And so you have 3, not just 2. And as we deal with these senses, where that is tickling in your head, inside, is right behind your olfactory bulb. And behind your olfactory bulb, there is a location where all of your senses meet. And that is why you have concepts such as, what do we do when we do a mantra? Or when we do meditation? Om. And you see the O takes you into the You start up, Om. What does Grandma do when she's thinking about something? She hums. Even the word hum is there. And so, the words that we use, the concepts that we have, the sounds that we make, in language, it's the sounds that we make that's important, not the words that we speak. Because Malcolm said that you can speak and lie. But when you come from the Spirit, you can't lie. Because your heart can't lie. That's why your heart was weighed against the Ma'atian feather. Because your heart can't lie. Unless you're a sociopath. We got some sociopaths, right? Okay, please, my sister, I saw your hand. Don't go around and I saw it. Please, my sister.
Okay, so my question is, in terms of gender, like what do you feel like the gender role should be for the male and the female?
When you say that, what do you mean?
So earlier you were saying like, we were talking about gender, right?
Yes.
So I guess in terms of in a relationship or raising children or in a family unit, what would you say are the gender roles?
Well, because of where I'm coming from, I'm very careful about telling other people how to manage their relation, because my wife and I have been married 41 years, and we still working. Marriage is something that you build on, and it's something that the 2 people are able to be able, but it's very important to understand, my sister, that you are half man and half woman. Okay? We as men are half women and half men. But it is the balance of it, and it was our daddy's chromosome that decided that I would become a man, and my daddy's X chromosome decided that my sister would become a woman. But the relationship has to be one of building. Is that the question that you're asking me?
I think that answers it, yes.
Okay, doctor, did you want to
Yeah,
ask?
just to make a point. Are you married now?
Say that again.
As I tell people, 2 wives, 3 girlfriends, 15 children. That's what I always tell everybody. 53 years, 5 children. So I'm married. Lashes on my back, keep me in check. What I was going to mention to the young lady's question, a friend of mine was discussing male and female. So he said to me, a man says, I'm a woman. Man says, I'm a woman. He says, the moon does not recognize that person as a female. You get what he's saying? No matter what you dress up to or you say anything, the moon, and the moon specifically, tells you who's a man and who's not a woman. So again, to say it the way he said, the men who were saying that they're homosexuals and bisexual, said the moon does not recognize them as a woman. You're only male and female, the universe recognizes you, only those 2. That's the best way I can answer the question. Just to say, to add on to what the professor is saying, is the way they teach us in chemistry is just a concept. You get the metal and non-metal. You know how they teach us it comes together. And they say there's an electron that moves. If that is, if you use that concept, the electron that moves from one metal to a non-metal, and then they join. So as he is saying, you are magnetism. When the electron moves, it's electricity. When they come together, it's magnetism. It's electromagnetism. So those are types of energy. There's positional energy. There's vibrational energy. So all of the things that he's saying, you can look at it in that concept. The thing about melanin, which I have to get more literature as the brother to go into deeper, but the basic concept of what I understand the melanin to do. Almost all animals and plants have some kind of color. The red pigment, the orange pigment, all the colors that you find, those are types of quote-unquote melanin. The way I describe melanin is that it's a what you call solar panel. That's what it does. It absorbs the energy from the sun and all of what's out there in what you call space, whatever that energy. So that's what it is. It's a solar panel. It collects all of those rays, whether it's from the sun, the moon, all of it. It's just general concepts. I don't have anything to point to, well, give it this name and that name. It's a solar panel. It collects the energy, and it uses that energy to do certain things in the body. So they always teach you in the book, whether it's true or not concept. They say you need vitamin D, and you need the sun to activate the vitamin D. That's what they say. But if you look at the molecule that represents vitamin D, there are a number of different types of D, but you'll see a certain structure. And then you look at that structure, the way they present it, then you see it similar to cholesterol. Then you look at the books and then they say, well, here's this cholesterol molecule, and this cholesterol molecule, the body uses it to make your stress hormones. The body uses it to make estrogen. The body uses it to make testosterone. So if you look at the book, you say the structure of vitamin D is identical to the structure of cholesterol. And they say from the cholesterol molecule, you get your stress hormone, your male, your female, and then you say the sun activates the vitamin D. So if this is true, it's just pointing to the concept, as he said, that energy, that solar panel, collects it, and it helps or allows the body to make all of these different chemicals in your body. It activates. So look at it in that concept that it's a solar panel. The other thing about the pineal is they say that it's a section of the brain that is supposed to be one of the main collectors of the electromagnetic spectrum. So in other words, we're sitting here. Technically, all this melanin is collecting electromagnetically like a solar panel. But in the part of the brain they call the pineal, it's just a gross oversimplification. It's a pineal. It's supposed to be one of the centers where it's like a master solar collector. And from that energy, or whatever the energy is, that's basically what plays a major role in running your body in all of those forms.
You know, it's interesting, Dr. Lewis, when he was talking about the pineal gland, I think of Star Trek, because I'm a Trekkie. Gene Roddenberry. When you look at the Enterprise as a ship, you notice that Captain Kirk is sitting in the center seat. And on one side of him he has Spock, who is logic.
Yes.
Okay? Which is the left side of the brain. On the other side he had Bones, who is very emotional.
Yes.
Right.
Okay, and he's the right side of the brain.
Yes.
But Captain Kirk sat in the seat and he was getting advice from both sides, which is your left and right hemisphere of your brain. The Enterprise, in a sense, in a metaphor, was like the human brain. And when Dr. Lewis is talking, we walk on the earth, sunlight comes down, your skin, epidermis and dermis. Epidermis is on top. You have 5 layers of skin. Stratum means, like level, stratum. Stratum corneum, stratum luciderm, stratum granulosum, stratum spinosa, stratum basale. 5 levels in your epidermis. In your bottom 2 layers, in the spinosum and the basale, you have a biochemical known as 7-dehydrocholesterol, just as the brother's saying. Because cholesterol, OL, comes from sterol. Okay, from the word sterol, that's just the OL at the end of sterol. 7-dehydrocholesterol biochemical in the bottom 2 layers. When the sun shines, the melanic state attracts and captures light and pulls it down into your skin. It meets with the 7-dehydrocholesterol. Everybody tells you you need vitamin D, but nobody tells you that there's 4 types of vitamin D. Vitamin D1, 2, 3, and 4. D1 and D2 is inactive. But when the sunlight comes down and is captured, that relationship between the 7-dehydrocholesterol and the sunlight, heat, and sound energy, it's not just light, it's heat and sound energy, is captured, and it converts D1, D2 into active D3, D4. Go to a health food store, ask for vitamin D. Every bottle will say D3.
You know what it's like? It's like that cosmic energy that runs your entire body.
Yes.
You can connect it to just what we just said. What the European knows, Dr. Ben always told us, you're distinctly different people. And that to me is an overview of what he's telling you. He's telling you in so many different ways. They know you are different. And they know what that melanin does. So they check, they take the melanin, the sunlight, electromagnetic energy, and they study the melanin and say, damn, it's running, it's making the hormones, it's making the cell membrane. It's so critical to all of your biochemical reactions. And they're trying to, learn about each of it. They know you are distinctly different people, and they're constantly searching, trying to figure out what it does. Most of the pigmented molecules are similar to melanin because they capture energy. That's why plants have colored pigment and stuff to capture the energy, not only to protect it, but it's the pigment in fruits and vegetables use the melanin the same way that your body uses it. Use it to run the system, basically. Just make 2 other points, then I'll lay down. I was driving with my wife, with one of my granddaughters, who's 4 years old. And she said to us, did so-and-so die, an older relative? She said, yes, the person died. She said, she's 4 years, she said, are you, Mommy, we call my wife Mimi, are you Mimi going to die? Yes. Are you Grandpa going to die? Yes. Then she said, where are you going to go? My wife said, to the universe. What's the universe? So she's asking these questions. Sitting down, in the 2 other points. In the Egyptian museum, you will see Tutankhamun and his mother, womb, and then God Ptah is the god of god of fertility or different names. You'll see that particular male god wearing a hat, that little skull cap that the Jews, the Christians, and Muslims, when people say, do they practice African culture? All of the culture of the world is African, from one way to the other. So he's putting Tutankhamun's, putting Tutankhamun's soul into him. And as he mentioned, you have different parts of it. And then you have the spiritual representation that can go on. So the end, so we're sitting down at the kitchen table with my wife and my other children, and the 4-year-old. We call her JJ. We're saying, has he or she ever been there? Because you see the grandchildren that come with different personalities. Said, has this one been here? She's been here. So my granddaughter said to us, she said, my mother and I was walking down the subway, walking down the trail. And she, my little granddaughter, and her mother fell in the hole and died. And then she put her head down and said, that's why I'm here. You talk to these children and stuff, your children. That's what she said. We were saying, were you here before? She said, yes. My mother, not my daughter's, she's my daughter's child, which is my grandmother. She said, my mother and I was walking. We fell in the hole and died. And I'm back here. So it's here. I mean, you don't have to worry about all of what they tell you. It's there.
Yes.
None of you have ever met your ancestors. My parents, my mother, father, brother, all the time. I meet them. We communicate, there's no talking. You just communicate. So what he's telling you, the Africans got it. The rest of these people don't have a clue to what's going on.
It's very true. It's true, and you know, family, you know, what Dr. Lewis, particularly now, what you're saying, it's just, it's simple yet complex. Because if we just understood that, every one of us would leave this room today a different person than came in. And everything we experience would be like that.
They have volumes of books, just studying the pineal and melanin. They're amazed at what that melanin molecule, with other things, makes you who you are. You're distinctly different people. Yes. Medically, with the bones and the skin and fertility, they know you're different. They're constantly trying to figure it out. Maybe trying to do you in. One last thing. I asked a friend of mine, said to me one time, the millionaires, he said, you know, these millionaires in the United States, they're rich. They really make the economy go on and stuff. I said, yeah, I said, that's what you say. I said, there's one person, individual, that is that you're describing that's indispensable to any society. He said, what is that? I said, you had one. He looked at me. I said, you had one. I said, it was your mother. And if you think the millionaire is important, that the professor here make a statement that men and women on earth can have all the sex they want, but no babies. How long would the human race be here if there was no birth from here? 100 years, we wouldn't exist. So who's important? The woman. I mean, the man is there. The woman, that's the vehicle. I mean, if you don't have the women, the ball game is over in terms of humanity. That's why when he made the point about they know they're going out, whatever is there, the fertility rate is very low. Whatever is happening, and that's what I felt he meant when he says they know the time is up. Has nothing to do with bombs. The time is up if you don't have another human being who look like you here 100 years, the ball game is over for you. And they know why you're going, where you're going. So that's the way I see it, that they see you.
Yes.
They fully understand. They look at you and say, my God, we killed down tens of millions of African people around the world. Hundreds of millions. And they're still here, the most populous. One last thing. If the count is accurate, they say there's 1.4 billion Africans on the continent. If you add up the Africans outside, India has 1.2 billion. At least a third of that is us. So you count 1 billion, 1.4 billion Africans on the continent, so they say. Then you add up India 1.2 billion, a third of that's us. So that's another 400 billion. So we got 2 billion human beings on Earth, on the continent, and in Asia. That's 2 billion alone. Then you add us in. They're looking at this and say, my God, it's too, they don't count you individually. They know, they say, damn, there's 8 billion people on Earth. was supposed to be 8. At least 3 being Africans now. Then with the birth rate is accurate, the average birth rate among people of color on the continent is 7. The average birth rate among all Europeans, almost all Asians, including the Chinese, replacement is 1.2, 1.5 and a half. You gotta have extra because children die. For whatever the reason, what he's telling you, the birth rate, the food and all of that, it ain't helping. It's that sun, it's that melanin. So right now, probably close to a quarter or a third of the human beings on earth is an African. Some of us are jet black, some of us are skin, and you still African. As long as you got enough of this, you're all right. So what, almost 25% minimum of human beings right now. And if you have a birth rate of 7, they say on average in Germany with the replacement, they're having 1.2. The African in Nigeria, 7. So you got, look, what the brother is telling you is fantastic. And these people who try to hold you down, they understand. That's why when he said to, they know the ball game is over.
Done.
The birth rate
Stick a fork.
is
Done.
over. You Africans are the only ones on earth, you include the Indians in India because they got this too. The only people on earth who are holding their population and increasing is people who got this. All the Europeans, most of the Asians, Europeans are finished. We had a book, one book here that says the, what we call it, the disappearing. Let's leave that alone. One last thing, what you said about, no, it's very important. I just want to put the tidbits
Please,
in.
I didn't know Dr. Lou was going to be here. This is a pleasure and an honor.
It is a pleasure.
In 2010, my son and I went to Britain. I think we went to Birmingham. There was a lecture. Kwesi, told me about it, and he introduced me, so I was able to go there through Kwesi. And the woman who's supposed to write a ticket for my son and I, she wanted to save some money, so she didn't give us a direct flight. We had to go indirect, find somebody to take us through France and then Britain. And we found out that most of the African-based people who were coming into the conference was blocked. So it was just lucky that we had that. And in England, as my son said, he said, this is where whiteness must have started. Because some of the people in England are to that, like that paint, that white paint. Mm-hmm. And there was a big discussion on TV and in Britain. You must marry some African of color. This is what the pigment. We are too weak. You must marry a brother or sister, a pigment, to get that, whatever they wanted to call it, to get that into them. You know that melanin in life. And then they said that the children will come out to be stronger. They talking all genetics, all of what he's talking about. They don't want to disappear. Then they said that child of the African and the European then should marry another white person. So the white person marries the African to get the energy and to get the longevity, and then that child, whatever you want to call it, now can marry a white to try to get it transferred. This thing is serious.
It's very serious.
Your biggest problem with these white people is you.
Yes. Listen.
Just how great they
Doctor, what you remind me of the concept in demography. It's called TFR, total fertility rate. And what is said is that there's a certain amount of children each family should have. The number they present is every family should have 3 children in order to keep the civilization moving. And so if you do the math of it, the total fertility rate, if you took 10 families of European descent, they should produce 26 children. okay? Because if it's 2.6 that you should make, 10 families would produce 26 children. They're only producing 1.6.
They're not replacing themselves.
They're not replacing. For everyone that dies, 6 won't be born. And go and read that article written by Sabrina Tavanisi, because what she does, she outlines the states where these the towns are dying out. They're putting up boards on town. They're moving, but their children are moving into Brooklyn. That's what this regentrification is. Because if they wanted to be around their own, if there were peoples of a European descent in a community, they would move with Europeans. The fact that they're moving with us means that those Europeans ain't moving out. There's no room for them there. So the only place they can come is to come to our community. And this is what's happening now.
In Europe right now, not only for some reason they have a fertility, they're contemplating, they say they need 35 million, they want to import into Europe 35 million Africans.
Yes.
Into Europe.
Yes.
And it isn't just to be a servant of stuff. It's to mix. And you know what's going to happen when it mix? You know what most of them, they're desperate.
That is it.
One last thing. You know, this is serious.
Hey, brother, express yourself. This is our conversation. Go ahead.
Remember what we said? That everything we say here, you're supposed to go and research it, not just walk away.
Yes.
But what does that mean for our numbers
That means we growing.
and our strength?
Well, look,
If
you got to
if
let's
you're
face it.
seeing,
You have the continent of the United States, of Africa. In 15 or 20 years of projection, it's going to be the African continent is going to be the engine of the world, not China.
Oh, yeah.
When you look at the difference, when you say what's going to be, look at us. We're still here.
Yeah, but the sister's raising a great point when she's talking about from our vantage point. In other words, should we be mixing with them or shouldn't we? I say we should not. But why should we allow them to exist?
We're not.
our strength and our.
Absolutely.
No, that's not the point that I'm making. All I'm making is, we're trying to look at, when he was pointing out, the mindset of the people who give you the problem.
Right.
They're the ones in desperation. They know whatever they do, they're not going to be here in 100 years. They're going to be 0 or 1%. They know it. So that the concept is, we just letting you know how powerful your melanin is and your populations are. So people say, what are we going to do? You got a continent that's 4 times larger than the United States, that right now have 65–70% of the arable land. We're going to be all right. The rest of the people not going to be all right.
Now, in terms of sister's question, you know, my perspective is go and look at a 6th grade science book, to Punnett's cube.
What is it?
P-U-N-E-T-T, Punnett's cube. Punnett's cube is where you have the big B, which is the dominant gene, and the little b, which is the recessive gene. So what Dr. Lewis, yourself, and myself is talking about is the manipulation of the big B and the little b. So if a little b recessive joins with a big B dominant, okay, then they become a big B little b. If the big B little b connect with a little b, 2 recessive, then you move that double B, small b, to another level. So you are supporting a recessive gene, you are questioning your dominant gene, but it is not to the dominant gene's advantage to mix with the little b. But I call it the Robert De Niro effect, or the Kim Kardashian effect, if you want the woman's. They know.
Right.
Kim Kardashian, I've heard Robert De Niro say himself, he will not be in the future if he doesn't mate with a black woman. And he been with the sisters because he knows that, you know, those that know, they would rather invest their seed in a black woman than not be here in 100 years.
They've been talking about that online. There's a lot of.
But even what Dr. Lewis is just saying, they are advertising in London, you must get with somebody. And so when you see this immigration immigration, and then you see this fight, and in France they have this replacer or something like that, where they got the replacement. Of course they're trying to make it political, that the Democrats are trying to bring in peoples of melanation in order to vote Democrat. That's political. But sociologically and biologically, that is true. They are being replaced, but they're not being replaced. They're just dying out.
Right. And the fact that you're going to have a certain, let's say 30 million Africans come in. And then whatever's going on there, the Africans on the continent, they're making babies with each other. They don't have the massive race mixing. Just because the crazy Europeans have a problem, you don't have that problem.
But I feel like they're trying to take us with them.
You talk to them.
Well, you know,
Destruction and.
You cannot lose in this game.
Right.
That's what they're saying. But my question to you, Doctor, you talked about a lot of stuff. You guys answer a lot of questions. I had about 30 questions. But you said you got to know your enemy, right?
Yes.
And I was thinking, if you dated a white woman, would that help your thought process in knowing your enemy? I'm asking for a friend.
Well, I've always said that, well, you know, I understand what you're saying, but I also want to say something else about this, because, you know, we really have to have these conversations, fam. We really do.
That's like dating his wife.
Yeah, well, yes, but you want to know something else? Once you go black, you never go back. So that in a sense, those that would be willing to engage in the other people, for whatever reason they choose, they are our allies. They may not be our friends, but they're our allies. Because if they mate with somebody, it's going to take them off the planet quicker than if they stayed with their own. So little by little, whatever choice you make. But I think the one thing that should come out of this meeting is that we are going to make it to the promised land. That's what I want to stress to us, because I know that with all that we're going through, with the pain and the struggles and what we're going through, what I just want us to understand is this. We have difficult days ahead. Dr. King was right. But we are going to make it to the promised land. In fact, you know something? We're already in the promised land. We just ain't acting like it. Because if we assume control over ourselves and the direction that we're going in life, and understood the distractions that take our minds off of all of this, we wouldn't have to worry about that. And they'd be chasing us, but we wouldn't want no part of them. Because why am I going to elect to be inferior? Why would I want to turn my black eyes blue? When I know that that's a recessive gene. Why would I want my hair? Okay, sisters, I ain't gonna say no more. Well, because not only that, but you know something? I have seen in South Africa black women with blonde hair, because ochre, O-C-H-R-E, was the first mineral that was used in the human family to begin to dye hair. I've seen hot combs in the Cairo Museum. Black women been straightening their hair before Europeans came out the cave. But they were doing it for different reasons. They weren't doing it to look like them. They were doing it for beautification, for difference in appearance. And brothers was wearing makeup.
You also have natural blonde people.
Yeah, but
oh, yes, you do. Oh, yeah, there's natural blonde. I know, Dr. Lewis. Yeah, you have black blondes. Okay, brother. Yes. It's family. I'm going to tell you what Dr. Saban told me and Sister Ma'at tell me about healing. The first step in healing is self-love. Dr. Clark, when I'm going to stop, but I know we already clapped, but I just want, this is like an encore. When I first met Dr. Clark at 12 and a half, it was in Harlem. And the old heads brought young brothers up. This is 1966. And I was, we were still about 5 of the young people. And at the end, they brought us up to meet Dr. Clark. This is my first time meeting him. I'm 12 and a half. And he said he was going to give us a homework assignment. And I'd like to give you all this homework assignment. I gave it to all of my children in school and my own children biologically. He told us he wanted us to go home and go into the bathroom and look in the mirror and tell the person we were looking at, I love you. And mean it. Because he said, if you can't do that, there's nothing anyone outside of you can do for you. We have to love the width of our nose, the melanin in our skin, the texture of our hair, the thickness of our lips. And if ever we look in the mirror and we may say that we may want to make some changes, we don't like how we look, it's not about you hating how you look. It's about you loving yourself and wanting better for you. And this is and once we can love ourselves and we can demonstrate, because our children used to get a kick out of standing at the bathroom door every day, and I used to elaborate on it, because I'd be throwing myself kisses and whatnot after I say I love you, because they heard me. I used to take them with me to my presentations, and they would hear me give this. You must love yourself. You have to look in the mirror. And so as children, they're curious. They're looking at me, and to this day, I still tell myself I love you. And I mean it. And that's what we all have to start to do. And once you do that, then everything else come and be. Because it's not about how you feel about someone else that's going to change your life. It's how you feel about yourself. And when you feel a certain way about yourself, you command a certain energy. You're talking about energy, magnetic, electric energy. You command the type of energy that makes people respect you. Because you respect yourself. And even if they try to disrespect you, I'm like rubber and they like glue. Whatever you throw at me, it bounces off of me, but it sticks to you. This is how we have to leave this room today. And we have to support the William Mackey study group. And we have to make sure that goes, because the First World Alliance, that was a golden age, family.
Yes.
What I praise Brother Bill and Sister Keffa. What they did for us was something that is just phenomenal. They had the soup out in the street, and they were selling books, and they were doing all sorts of things. And I remember that was a golden age. That was when I first met Dr. Richard King. And that was the first time that Frances Cress Welsing I had seen in the 70s. But when she came, they couldn't have it at the church on 145th Street. They had to have it at CCNY in the gym, because so many people came to see Dr. Welsing, they couldn't hold the space. And every week that we would go there, it would invigorate us. But there's something else I remember. I remember when Charles Finch came. They were honoring Charles Finch. And Charles Finch brought his wife. And at the end, we all assembled in the front. We were talking to Dr. Finch, and his wife was there. And his wife said something I noticed about the group. And, she said, some of the participants have outgrown the lectures. And what she meant was, when you've been in the William Mackey study group for the length of time, and you've learned from those scholars, from Trust and from Dr. Lewis and from Brother Graves, what do you do with it? Are we just workshopped out? Are we just going to workshop this all the way? Or are we going to take what we learned and do something with it? And that's what I decided to do. I decided that I wanted to take the richness of the experience of First World, and I wanted to do something. So we started the Institute for Youth. We went online. We have the Per Onc. We have what we have now, our webinars and our webinars. That's all First World Alliance. That's the group in New Jersey, African Echoes.
Yes, sir.
Okay? That's the United African Movement.
Yes.
These are all continuations of the same thing that is supplying us with the information we need to do something. That's what we have to do. But it's happening as we speak. That's the one thing I want us to understand. And Dr. Lewis, I'm so happy to see you, brother. It's been a while.
Well, I'll be here next 2 weeks when you're here again.
Wow.
Next year. You'll be here next year.
I remember what happened when you came and spoke on Asia that time. And you turned the lights out. And then when we turned the lights on, there was a whole other group of people in that room. Boy, their eyes had grown. Why? Because the information they had received, they had never conceptualized as a black people. And when you finally find out who you are, oh my goodness gracious.
And you find that you're global, that's what makes the difference.
And you're not alone.
Not alone.
You're not alone. Pan-African or perish.
And how do we bring this message to our children?
By example. Live it. Do it.
Yes,
Study
yes,
it.
but-
Let them see it. Talk to them. Examine them. And let them understand what it is that they have to do. Let them understand what their responsibilities are.
But we're in a position where we have to counteract.
No, you don't have to counteract nothing. Says you got it.
Education,
Oh, well, that's the key.
in school.
See, because my thing is, I'm not into the school system no more. Okay? I'm not into trying to convince them. I'm into developing church groups and study groups and people who are working with children, homeschoolers. How we in our homes can do this. How did I do it as a parent? How did I bring information to my children? How did I do it? I did it by bringing them with me to my presentations. Remember the Freedom Home Retreat when you brought your family and I had my family? There was a young lady there that was rather advanced for her age. Not the time that you were there, I don't think it was the second year. And I think you came the first year and the second year. But I remember that she came and her parents were lawyers. They were friends of Attorney Maddox. And they gave her, and the first year she acted very inappropriately. She was way beyond her age for who she was. But she came from a family of lawyers. She had been around a conversation going on for a long period of time. Brother Ray, I'm going to drop it around here now. I'm African. Time don't mean nothing to me. But when I say that, time is the most precious thing we have. But the point I'm making is that, there we go, we're clapping, get this over. Okay, I'm going to finish. Like Dr. Lewis said, this is the last thing. When the second year she came back, and she was a model person. And I remember we were by the pool one day. And she had seen me interacting with our daughters. You know, my daughters, I used to bring them up to the retreat. And during a private conversation, she said to me, you know, my parents are very successful lawyers. And they have a lot of money, and they each gave me my own credit card. She said, but I would turn both those credit cards in if I could have a relationship with my parents the way your children have with you. And that told me everything that I needed to know as it relates to what we have to do. We have to take care of our babies. Nothing special. My work schedule was so tough, I didn't have time to do what we professed to do, sit around the table and talk. But when I came home, I would go to ShopRite, to the supermarket, and I'd bring them with me. And when they were with me, we would talk. We'd have a conversation. How was your day? What's going on? That's how. It's the quality, not the quantity of time.
Awesome.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen. The party's over. Brother Kaba, great big hand. Hotel family.
If you go on, if you YouTube, the Brooklyn William Mackey Jr. History Club,
Yes,
you
brother,
can
50.
view all of our videos on the Brooklyn William Mackey Jr. History Club on YouTube. All the videos come up, except the two that they banned in Dr. Lewis. I have those right there on the side. In 2 weeks, we will be back.